Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome everyone to our Truck Regulation Implementation Group, or as we call it, TRIG, meeting on the rule provisions for the Advanced Clean Fleets. This is the fourth of four TRIG meetings that were held this week and is scheduled for the next 3 hours. Our intention for today's meeting is to allow open communication and solicit feedback on implementation of the ACF regulation. Today's meeting will feature a panel of approximately 30 stakeholders affected by the regulation. In addition to the panel members, the meeting is also open to the public. Panel members will be able to provide verbal comment and feedback at any time throughout the meeting, and the general attendees from the public will have opportunities at certain points in the meeting to provide written feedback using the chat function. And if time allows, we will open it up to provide verbal feedback as well. Meeting materials are included that include an agenda. That include the PowerPoint presentation are available on the Advanced Clean Fleets Meetings and Events webpage. My name is Jerry Baruman, and I'm a manager in the Transportation and Clean Technology branch at CARB. I am joined by my team members today, Chelsea Danielson and Jimmy Steele. Before we begin the presentation, I want to let everyone know that this meeting is being recorded, and a copy of this recording will be made available on our website. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Chelsea to start today's presentation. Take it away, Chelsea.
Hi, my name is Chelsea Danielson. Welcome to the first meeting of the newly formed Truck Regulation Implementation Group. Today I will give a brief overview to set the stage for our following discussion. We're committed to the successful implementation of the Advanced Clean Fleets Regulation and appreciate everyone's time and attention. On August 22nd, staff conducted a kickoff meeting to seek feedback on the formation of a series of work groups to assist the implementation of the ACF regulation. An application to join the ACF Truck Regulation Implementation Group, or TRIG, was sent out through a bulletin on September 15th and closed on September 29th. Staff reviewed survey responses and selected active members with the aim of balancing stakeholder representation for each of the 4 work groups. However, due to an overwhelming interest in the TRIG, not all applicants were selected, and applicants were placed into only one group. Emails were sent out to all applicants on October 20th, 2023, informing them of the initial selection. Although this initial list has been established to balance the group under 30 active members. The first quarterly meetings are December 4th, which was Monday, and today, December 8th. Meeting quarterly is an example of the commitment we are looking for from everyone. The agenda for today's meeting will cover the introductions and the purpose of TRIG. We'll provide a brief overview of rule provisions, member roles, and meeting expectations, and introduce the rule provision co-chairs. We will then have a presentation to cover the infrastructure delay extension, ZEV availability, and the ZEV purchase exemption. Finally, we will open the floor to discussion. Future meetings will follow the same standardized agenda as today. The Advanced Clean Fleets Regulation was adopted by the board on April 28, 2023, and approved by the Office of Administrative Law and became effective on October 1st, 2023. We're committed to successful implementation of the Advanced Clean Fleets Regulation to discuss the best practices for ACF implementation consistent with the regulation language, develop recommendations and action items on selected topics, and facilitate constructive dialogue to address key rule implementation issues. The purpose of TRIG is to discuss best practices for ACF implementation consistent with the regulation language, identify rule provisions that need clarification and the main concern for fleet owners and operators, solicit feedback to develop the action items, outreach materials, and fact sheets on selected topics, and to facilitate constructive dialogue to address key rule implementation issues. Fleet-specific questions should be directed to the ZEV Fleet email, which is zevfleet@arb.ca.gov.
Thank you, Chelsea. My name is Jimmy Steele, and I'm an air pollution specialist. Chairs are responsible for facilitating a roundtable discussion to improve meeting productivity and open dialogue. The purpose of TRIG is to have an open forum to engage in constructive dialogue, and active members are panelists for each of the TRIG groups. The chairs of each group can add or remove members as needed to maintain balance and productivity. Chairs for each group can decide to meet more frequently or on an as-needed basis. Only active members for each topic area are panelists and may have video, chat, and screen share permissions and can mute, unmute themselves. All active members are expected to arrive to the scheduled meeting on time, review meeting summaries, and engage in constructive dialogue. CARB staff do not provide support for Zoom software, but will serve to host and administer the Zoom functions throughout the meetings. Time will be available for public comment at the end of each meeting. After each meeting, active members are expected to provide CARB staff feedback on meeting summaries. All meetings will be recorded and meeting materials will be available online. The public and active members of other topic areas can attend any meeting and can be unmuted to provide comment at the end of the meeting. Also, each group can decide whether additional mediators are needed after this initial meeting. Lastly, the TRIG is not set up as an advisory committee to the board. Meeting materials are posted on the ACF meetings and events page. All meetings will be recorded. Action item summaries will be developed after each meeting. The rule provisions group's primary focus is on the process for applying for and receiving exemptions consistent with the regulation language. This will likely be a little more technical than other categories and will involve working through the specific provision details and how to streamline the applications and approval process. This subcommittee is prioritizing the ZEV purchase exemption and the infrastructure delay extension, since those applications are more involved than the other flexibilities. Now I will introduce our rule provisions co-chairs. We have Bradley Northrup, a public works superintendent for the city of Carlsbad, and Rebecca Schenker, vice president for G&A, Clean Transportation and Energy Consultants. CARB and co-chairs are responsible for keeping the meetings on track and facilitating constructive open dialogue. Co-chairs are CARB are responsible for establishing the agenda. Now I'll hand over the slides to Brad and Rebecca.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, CARB staff. And thank you for the introduction. My name is Bradley Northup. I'm the Public Works Superintendent for the City of Carlsbad. And I'm happy to be part of this group, happy to be part of the discussion, especially enthused to be able to get these types of discussions moving along expeditiously. We're going to keep it short and sweet for introductions and move through, but I do want to kind of prompt everybody on the call, every panelist on the call that's going to be introducing themselves, give your name, affiliation, but then also what we'd like to do is make sure that everybody is starting this off with an optimistic approach. And so what we'd like you to think about as we go through these introductions, and Rebecca introduces herself, think about something that you're optimistic about regarding the ACF over the next year. And I'm optimistic that these meetings specifically will provide that clarity that fleet managers currently are lacking, and allowing us to really build our clear pathways towards compliance. And that's really what these meetings are built for. I'm very optimistic that these meetings are going to be helpful for everybody. With that, Rebecca.
Great. Thanks, Brad. Rebecca Schenker, Vice President of Regulatory Compliance at GNA. Have the pleasure of working with some of you on this committee and here with folks at CARB for many years on implementing rules. And I'm excited to be here today. I think thanks for kicking it off with the positivity, because I think there's a lot that we've been working through that can be challenging, but I think the guiding star for all of us is that we all want cleaner air, we all want cleaner vehicles, we all want a better climate. And I had the pleasure of reviewing an EV deployment list today with literally hundreds of new EVs coming into California. And I think that's why we're all here. And that is something that I am feeling really positive about. So going to jump it over to Jerry for introductions, and then the whole set of folks here on the call.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I've already kind of introduced myself, but really quick, I am Jerry Baruman, and I'm one of the section managers at CARB, working in the Transportation and Clean Technologies branch. I've worked at CARB for over 10 years on all kinds of regulations that we've implemented in the past, probably the biggest one being truck and bus. Probably folks are familiar with that. But I have been working over 30 years for several different environmental protection agencies. So I am very committed to helping the environment, and I'm glad to be part of this trig. So with that, I'm going to advance the slide here, and we will let Bradley and Rebecca go over some of the objectives and then go into some of the introductions.
Thanks, Jerry. Yeah. So before we go into panelist intros, we did want to just double down on the objectives of this committee, right, or of this group. We are here to help streamline the process, making this process easy, making this process a lot more confident and informative to the fleet managers that are submitting for compliance, or those agencies that are affected, and improving the consistency in the materials needing to be submitted. I think that's one key element that we're going to be discussing a lot, is what information and in what format and in how we're transacting those things.
Yeah. And I think just to also really underscore, I think a lot of us, especially kind of approaching end of year as we're reporting and trying to get everything buttoned up for 2024, we're all facing a lot of deadlines, a lot of challenges, a lot of new things right now. But specifically, the objectives of this group are to think about moving forward in the future, these really kind of narrow provisions associated with the rule where we don't have processes in place yet. We don't have FAQs yet developed. And so the kind of tools that we're going to need as an industry, the kind of resources that we'd like to direct CARB to develop, or request, not direct, but really say, this is something that we're missing, but then here's things from our experience as well that might be able to support real world related to these exemptions and extensions. What are we seeing in the field?
Absolutely. And really, we're here to learn from everybody here on this call. That's why this call and this panel is built up in the way it is. We're representative of many multiple sectors. And if we don't specifically have one sector represented, we have the connections within this committee and this group to be able to make those connections and request that information, because really, we're all standing to learn something from these discussions, CARB especially, but ourselves as well when we go through these discussion points. And ensuring the consistency in the process, again, in the exemption applications for everybody involved. There is not going to be a silo, and there will be transparency in the process itself for everybody involved. Jerry, you want to kick it over to the next slide and we can start going?
Yeah, and I just wanted to, before we jump over there, I want to thank again Bradley and Rebecca for being our co-chairs in this, and I want to thank you, Rebecca, for clarifying that this isn't a forum to direct CARB, that we're going to give CARB homework to do. This is something for all of us to work together to make this work. So this isn't a forum for, hey, CARB, you need to do this. It's CARB, this is what we're seeing. How can we work together to make it work? So I appreciate that clarification when you were going through that, Rebecca. And with that, we will start our introductions here. So a name that probably a lot of folks here are familiar with. Tony, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, Tony Brazil, branch chief, overseeing a lot of our rulemaking efforts, our existing rules, as well as some of our newer ones.
And what are you optimistic about for the next year at ACF there, Tony?
It's hard to say at the moment. I'm optimistic that I think through this group and working with people, we'll be able to save everybody time and effort in terms of addressing the issues that we expect to see. I do like the NACFE statement of, yeah, we anticipate there's going to be a messy middle or a bumpy road here along the way. That's why we put in a lot of the provisions in the rule to address those situations where they do occur. And I'm hopeful that one, we can learn a little bit better to speak in different industry groups' language to make things more intuitive to them. And frankly, looking for some expertise, honestly, in certain areas of, we identified certain things in the rules, for instance, but different entities have different ways to describe them, public fleets versus others and so on. The better we can understand that, the better we can inform them as well.
All right, Brett Stevens, Daimler Trucks.
So it's my turn next. Brett Stevens, Daimler Trucks North America. Thank you for allowing me to participate in this process. I do want to echo some sentiments Bradley already shared of what I'm looking or what I'm optimistic about this group is the clarity, and kind of beyond clarity is really a common understanding of how the rules will be administered. I don't think it's a secret that fleets navigating this process are looking for ways to reduce the financial impacts of ACF on their business. So a shared understanding of how the rules will be administered, favoring fairness is what I'm optimistic about.
Great. David Clifford for.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is David Clifford. I'm with Ventura Transfer Company. We're a chemical hauler here in California. We've been in business since 1869 and also the oldest trucking company in California. And I guess I'm optimistic that I'm here to able to provide some perspective from the bulk tanker industry to carve on these new regulations. So thank you for having me.
Welcome, David. Welcome. Don Jones.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Don Jones. I'm the Director of Fleet Management for the City and County of San Francisco. And I'm very optimistic that being part of this group will help us all smooth out the bumps in the road that Tony was talking about.
Thanks, Dawn, for joining us. Emily, I'm not going to know how to pronounce your last name, so.
No problem. Emily LeMay with the Northern California Power Agency, or NCPA. We're a joint powers agency with 16 members, mostly publicly owned utilities throughout Northern and Central California. We also have our own fleet owning, operating our power plants. And I really appreciate being here. I am optimistic in that this forum and CARB staff seem open to identifying issues early on so that we can kind of proactively address them during implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Harmony Gates.
Harmony won't be joining today.
Oh, okay. We'll move on to, looks like Jamie Levin.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to participate. I'm Jamie Levin with the Center for Transportation and the Environment. We're a nonprofit based in Berkeley, California. We've successfully been involved in deploying zero-emission buses and trucks. We have the largest fuel cell truck deployment happening as we speak in Northern California. And I think I'm very optimistic about where the state is going to push the envelope to achieve what is absolutely going to be our future. But we also are living the real challenges for the end users to be able to transition to this new technology. And it is not easy. It is not easy with respect to technology capability and also to the costs associated with that and the supporting infrastructure. So I look forward to us working as a group to really bring this together to make it as easy as possible for the end user, for the fleet operators. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. I think that's a pretty good summary of where a lot of us are, that we're optimistic but excited to have this opportunity to talk through the challenges. Jason Stepke.
Looks like Jason might be having an issue. We'll go ahead and move on.
So this is John Costantino here on behalf of the California Council of Environmental and Economic Balance. I'm happy to be here and I appreciate the invite. I'm very optimistic that the fast turnaround times that ZEV Fleet's email has had and will continue. There's a lot of questions that I know folks are asking. I personally, I think I've asked 60 questions and have 20 pages of notes. So I appreciate the way those are answered because the clarity is really important. I'm also optimistic that we'll get to the answer of what a fleet can buy January 2nd. Right, there's a lot of questions about what you can buy depends on when you what milestone or model year pathway you go for. There's the AB 1594 that will affect state and local government fleets, the safety exemption, and some other things that I'm hopeful and optimistic we get to besides the very big ticket items that we're starting with. Thank you.
Well, John, the ZEV Fleet team says thank you for the recognition there.
Absolutely, they do a lot of work. Yep.
Awesome, thank you, John. And Kristen Corby.
I think Cali TC is having their board meeting today, so.
Gotcha, okay. We'll move on to Lacey Robertson.
Hi, thanks for having me. Lacey Robertson with Rush Enterprises. We are the largest commercial vehicle dealership group in the country. We represent Peterbilt, Navistar, Ford, Hino, Isuzu. And I'm really excited and optimistic about getting consensus and clarity on definitions and interpretations of the regulation so that fleets can implement more seamlessly and avoid any non-compliance just based on misunderstanding. And like John said, I also am very eager to understand what combustion vehicles fleets can actually buy and remain in compliance with the regulation in 2024.
Thanks, Lacey. Marty?
Can you hear me okay, Rebecca?
Sure can.
Okay, great, thank you. Marty Tufte with Waste Management, one of the corporate fleet directors at the enterprise level. And I guess I had a hard time getting in, so I think I understand the question. What I'm most optimistic about is that we do have a committee where everybody can come together and we can talk about these things from a fleet perspective and work through the challenges as one cohesive unit. That would be my hope.
Thanks, Marty. Next up is Matt Messick.
Hey, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Messick. I'm the Director of EV Strategies at Isuzu Commercial Truck of America. We're the distributor of Isuzu Commercial Trucks here in the United States, and we have a vehicle portfolio that covers classes 3 through 7, incorporating multiple powertrains. So we have diesel, gasoline, and now we're introducing battery electric. It's an honor to be a part of this panel and look forward to constructive conversations and very optimistic about the outcome of these discussions and how to help our fleets and customers with their understanding and guidance for the rules and the exemptions that they could have. And also, more selfishly, optimistic to see that ACF, in regards to the push-pull effect that it'll have as a requirement for us as an OEM, achieve our ACT compliance. So very thankful for that, and thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Michael Lewis?
Good afternoon. I'm Michael Lewis. I'm the Senior Vice President of the Construction Industry Air Quality Coalition. It's an organization of all of the major construction associations in California. It's been around for about 30 years. Our job is to help the industry in the development of regulations and in the implementation of those and compliance with those regulations. And I guess I'm optimistic that we're finally going to be able to unravel or untangle some of the complexities of this ordinance or this regulation and make it a little more easy to comply with for the construction industry. And and the various components and the way the construction industry operates. We have an awful lot of trucks that are affected by this regulation.
All right, thank you, Michael. Absolutely, yeah. There's a whole extra layer of complexity. Work truck is one dump truck is different than the next dump truck, and there's quite a few different definitions and styles. Next up is going to be Mike Gabbard. All right, looks like Mike Gabbard is not available. Let's move on to Mike Tunnel.
He is available. He's on mute.
Oh,
I'm sorry. That's my bad. I apologize for that, Bradley.
It happened.
Thank you for the introduction, though. And again, my name is Mike Gabbard. I'm Vice President of Logistics for Raley's Family of Fine Stores. And again, thank you for this opportunity to be a part of this panel. I am very optimistic that these meetings will help promote a smooth transition to a zero emissions fleet. Raley's has already dipped our toe in the water with electric yard tractors. Very passionate about the intent of what we're trying to do here with reducing emissions. And I think through better understanding and clarity of what's expected is another thing that I'm hoping to gain from being a part of this panel on this rules committee. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And next, Mike Tunnel.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Tunnel. I'm with the American Trucking Associations. ATA is the largest national trade association representing the trucking industry. We have affiliated state associations in all 50 states, including California. And so I'm very pleased to be joining this group, and I'm optimistic that working with the members in this group to discuss the issues that are coming up and try and get consistency in responses to these questions so that fleets know exactly what they need to do to comply, and we all have the same understanding of what the regulation requires. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Next up is going to be Morgan Mitchell.
Hi, I'm Morgan Mitchell with the Westside Water Authority. We manage 4 different water districts in Northwest Kern County. We have a pretty sizable fleet to be able to maintain and manage conveyance of water systems for about 350,000 acres of ag land. I'm most positive about really learning better ways to tangibly and actively pursue provisions for some of the smaller districts that are out there, as well as implement these regulations as we move forward. So it doesn't seem like we're fighting against the state, but really moving towards something meaningful, but actually being able to consider all aspects of the industry.
Thanks so much, Morgan. Nick Blair.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Nick Blair. I'm with the Association of California Water Agencies, otherwise known as ACWA. ACWA represents over 470 local public water agencies throughout California that supply domestic, agricultural, industrial water resources to over 90% of California's population. I guess I'd say a lot of folks have already covered what I'm enthusiastic about, but I think this is a great forum for hearing from a lot of different folks in industries that are complying with this rule. So I think it's a good opportunity for us quarterly or however often we decide to meet to report back on what our fleets are dealing with in real time as they're trying to comply with the rule. So looking forward to collaborating with you all.
Thank you, Nick. All right, next up is Rick Albertini.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that. I'm Rick Albertini with Phoenix Truck and Van. We're a Southern California-based truck bodybuilder and upfitter for municipal government and utility fleets. We've been here in Southern California for actually 45 years, and work with a lot of these different fleets that we're discussing, especially in the work truck industry. So I'm really excited about trying to get this some understanding of how this is going to be able to apply to that kind of specific segment of the ACF rules. And I'm optimistic about being part of this group so we can develop consistent and workable solutions for those fleet customers so that they can comply with ACF as we all go forward.
Thank you, Rick. And Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. Sarah Delorier, representing the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, which represents over 90% of the municipal wastewater sector, providing essential public services, but also in some cases collection systems, as well as serving for emergency response. So definitely, as far as what I'm optimistic about is thinking about all of those in consideration of seeking that clarity, as so many folks have mentioned already, and specifically trying to develop some or support development of guidance documents so we don't have to revisit and reinvent the wheel each time we have a question about this going forward, and working together to just, I guess, address all the nuances relative to how we're all trying to do this together. So yeah, optimistic about doing that and really answering questions that our members have.
Thank you, Sarah. Next up is Steve Nelson.
Hi, I'm Steve Nelson. I'm with Masolo Trucking out of Salinas, California, and Yuma, Arizona. Currently down in Yuma, Arizona right now. We're a large agricultural company, hauling company, transportation company. What I'm most optimistic about is finally getting a chance to work with everyone here and get some answers, not only for myself, but for the different companies that I work with. There's a lot of other companies in the Salinas Valley and Yuma, Arizona as well that are all have a lot of questions that need to be answered. And there's a lot of people that are really in the dark, and I think it's because they're really burying their heads in the sand and not wanting to look at it. And I'm looking forward to, breaking that barrier and really working with everybody here to make things more clear for everyone.
Thanks. I think we all are, Steve. Suzanne.
I'm Suzanne Sifright Sutherland from California Construction and Industrial Materials Association, better known as CalCIMA. CalCIMA members produce sand, stone, gravel, asphalt, concrete, minerals, and rare earth materials. Our materials are used to make highways, schools, roads, and in essence, if it's built, our materials are in it. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this group, and I'm optimistic that working together will create a more workable path to compliance.
Thanks, Suzanne. And last but not least, we'll have William Ryder.
Yeah, hi, I'm Will Ryder. I'm the Vice President of Fleet Operations for Brinks, and I'm also a chair of our Global Fleet Excellence Committee. I'm partnered with OEMs and entities to lower fleet emissions globally. In prior companies, I've led alternative fuel and ZEV projects to integrate into fleets, electric vehicles, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles into very large, and diverse fleets. That said, I'm excited to be a contributing member of this group, and I'm looking forward to what it is that we're going to accomplish together.
Thanks, Will. All right, nice to meet everybody. Introductions are concluded. We can move on to the next slide, and we're going to get right into the thick of things here and start talking about what we're all here for, the rule provisions.
Hey, Bradley?
Yes.
I just wanted to let everyone, the general attendees, know that we'll open up the chat right now. If you want to drop a quick introduction in the chat and what you're optimistic about, then we'll have that available as well. But we'll continue with the slides as that's happening as well. So just wanted to let the general attendees know.
Thank you, Jerry. Yes, and everybody else on the call, we are very much interested in encouraging participation with the chat. Please do use that for communicating. We're going to be recording those and seeing what the temperature is in the room, so to speak. going into this next slide is really just giving a summary of what these key extensions and rule provisions are. 11 total, and to expedite, I guess, the sentiment of concern, there are some of these provisions that are the most impactful or the most I wouldn't call that burdensome. I think the question that we all sent out a little bit earlier, if we want to move on to the next slide, to all the panelists ahead of time, or what are the top three areas of these provisions that are the biggest challenge for you now, and that'll be the biggest challenge for you next year, and what is the biggest ACF overall challenge that you're dealing with right now? And this was really to help triage what we need to tackle first. Rebecca mentioned it in her first comments, is we're all dealing with very fast deadlines and we need answers quickly. And we know that we have very big challenges. And what is the biggest challenge right now that we need to start working on so that fleets have a better understanding moving forward? So here's the results, polling results. The biggest challenge now, it was a resounding ranking of infrastructure delay, won out in the infrastructure delay extension specifically, second to ZEB purchase exemption and the daily usage exemption. What was interesting is we were expecting a little bit of a difference in, at least I was, in what the next challenge would be in 2024. And it looks like we're looking at the exact same challenge. I think my thought is by the end of our probably fourth or fifth meeting, if these biggest challenges in 2024 have changed from any of these into something else, we're doing a good job so far. we're taking that off of everybody's plate. So with that, Rebecca, did we want to move back into, oh, I'm sorry, we're going to be handing it back off to Jerry for his team. And Rebecca, did you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I think it just as a reminder, we are all facing a number of challenges that don't occur on the list of provisions. And I just want to acknowledge that and acknowledge what people submitted, and that these are real and that this is hard, and that this sort of thing, this is not the only committee that is trying to address these challenges. So everything that has been submitted to CARB prior to this is also going to get distributed among the various committees to go across staff groups. And there's an awareness that we're focused on trying to address the exemptions and extensions, but that these are not the only things that the folks on this call are facing. So this is what came up as, hey, we have the biggest questions, the biggest needs. These are some of the most complex and thorny provisions that we need to address as a group. And, yesterday, so I just want to acknowledge what the feedback we have been getting, and that all of it is appreciated and helpful.
All right, thanks, Rebecca. So I will jump in really quick, and we did prepare some slides on both of the top two poll results. So we will be presenting those, but we did want to let everyone know that we do have some existing resources already in place for the ACF regulation. In addition to, if you listened in on some of the other TRIG meetings that happened earlier this week, those will be happening. But we also have a lot of FAQs, training modules, and compliance tools available online on the ACF webpage. There is a webinar that's going to be happening next Friday, so a week from today. You have to register. We put a link in there that will focus only on high priority fleets. So that will be helpful if you fall into that category. And we also are working on video modules to help with the actual, instead of just having to read information, we will walk you through it in a video, more of a YouTube type video format. So we're working on all of these different tools to help. But we will be focusing now on, we will start out with infrastructure delay. Chelsea from the team is going to take over here and take it away, Chelsea.
All right. I'll now provide everyone information on the infrastructure delay extension. In the next 5 slides, I'll walk you through the requirements of this provision per the regulation, and we'll have an open discussion. So please hold your comments until then. Now jumping right in, what is the ZEV infrastructure delay extension? It is a temporary compliance extension to address situations where a fleet owner would become non-compliant with the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation due to infrastructure delays beyond their control. The extension provides more time to add ZEVs to the fleet if a project to install the charging or hydrogen fueling infrastructure needed to operate their ZEVs, if started 1 year ahead of the compliance date is delayed. The extension may be granted for up to 5 years, depending on the specific circumstances. Fleet owners must apply for the extension 45 days prior to the applicable compliance date and show that the criteria to qualify for the extension has been met. There are 2 primary extension categories. First is a construction-related delay for a project where the construction permit was issued 1 year prior to the compliance date, and the delay is a result of any one of the following, which would be delays in manufacture and shipping of ZEV fueling infrastructure equipment, delays due to a change of a general contractor, delays in obtaining power from a utility after construction begins, delays due to unexpected safety issues at the construction site, discovery of archaeological, historical, or tribal cultural resources, natural disasters, and the construction delay is up to a 2-year extension. Secondly, there is a delay for when the utility cannot supply enough power to the fleet owner's site to support the required ZEVs, and the fleet owner receives documentation from the utility 1 year prior to the compliance date. Extensions for a utility-based delay sunsets on January 1st, 2030, and can no longer be used to support extension requests after that date. The utility-related delay has a first extension of up to 3 years, but you can reapply for up to 2 more years of an extension. Now looking at the construction-related infrastructure delay, these are the items that are summarized for what's required for you to submit to try and obtain that extension option. So I'll go over this briefly. Extension applications submitted will need to be submitted by email, and the email will be truckers@arb.ca.gov. A letter from the responsible official explaining the reason for the delay, the estimated completion date, and why retail ZEV fueling infrastructure cannot be used, the executed contract for the infrastructure installation. The reason for the delay is a result of eligible circumstances. The reason for the delay from the licensed contractor, utility, building department, or other organization on the project, and the executed ZEV purchase agreement. Now moving forward, we'll look at the requirements to apply for the utility-related infrastructure delay. Also, you'll send that documentation by email to truckers@arb.ca.gov, and it will include a copy of the site electrification application submitted to the utility, consistent with required annual ZEV deployments, a copy of the utility's response, including the reason the project will take longer than a year with the estimated project completion date, an estimate of the kilowatts the utility can supply annually, a copy of the executed utility contract, information about the ZEV fueling infrastructure equipment that can be installed each year consistent with the utility's electric capacity estimate, and applications from fleet owners with multiple sites must include evaluation of all sites where vehicles are domiciled. For either circumstance, applicants must submit the documentation to truckers@arb.ca.gov at least 45 days prior to the upcoming compliance date to demonstrate eligibility and to justify the time period for the extension. A more detailed list of the documentation requirements can be found on the infrastructure delay extension fact sheet. And here is a link to that fact sheet to see more detailed information for the documentation or other questions you may have. All right, so we can get into the open discussion if anyone has questions, concerns, comments on infrastructure.
And just before we get into that, I do want to give everyone a time check. We have a end time of 4 p.m. Pacific. We are at 1:45. So why don't we watch the clock here, and probably we at most have an hour to discuss this this provision, and then we'll have to switch over to the ZEV purchase exemption. So that being said, I see Jamie has a hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Gerald. So one issue I think that the regulation has to address is a network of stations and infrastructure. So we're working largely, we work with both battery and fuel cell. And so hydrogen infrastructure, trucking is going to depend, especially longer haul regional trucking, on multiple stations. So much of what was previously discussed is specific stations where a fleet operator and the station are tethered together. But there are many instances where there has to be a network of stations and infrastructure. So I'm wondering how the regulation is going to address that network, which isn't a specific construction delay to a specific station, but the actual availability of a network of stations to support trucking in regional and long haul applications.
Well, that's a great question, Jamie, and that's probably something we should talk about here. You know, because the way the regulation is written, we are looking at, you know, each project. So if the network is part of the project, then I would imagine that they would all be part of that same delay, or I'm sorry, application process. But you know, so that we have to be able to understand that in your application. Your application has to be able to identify that this is for a, you know, this is the scope of the project that's being
Yeah, I can jump in. No, the regulation doesn't address infrastructure networks. The timing of how we laid out the rule and giving the options was intended to allow sufficient time for those networks to be developed. But the provisions here are applicable to largely, you know, upgrades done on a fleet property. There are examples of parking lots and other things where you can have contracts to have the use of a facility, and the rule does have language associated with that. But yeah, so I mean, so to me, I want to make sure that, you know, want to find that right balance of, this isn't just a question answer session for describing the rule. It's like, let's identify the various issues and then let's see what we could do to find them, and then to me to find solutions, and then to an extent it's you know, what are takeaways that we can have by the end of this meeting as to you know, additional follow-up that we might need in the near term, versus also getting better feel for what are ways to share this information that might be more effective, if we can do that too.
I think, Tony, just to follow up, I want trucking and regional movement of goods is going to be a major factor in addressing this. The regulation is attempting to address drayage regional haul. Typically, those vehicles do not tether to a specific station. They have to have a network. And so given the priority for drayage, for trucking, regional haul trucking and the like, I think we have to understand what's it going to take to provide that network, even if it's charging infrastructure that has to support a vehicle that needs to be recharged in its particular duty cycle without returning to the you know, its domicile.
Are we still talking about the actual? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Jerry. Can I ask a question just in my own information? In that context where you're talking about a network, Does that need to be like a secure network where there's secure facility, or is public infrastructure then the expectation as support for those network operations?
I think it's got to be a public, we're looking at public access. It could be a card lock station, could be a openly retail station, but bottom line, that network has to exist if you expect the fleet operator to be able to run their normal duty cycle, and their expectation that they have to be able to go where they need to go based on their location to be recharged or refueled.
And I want to make sure that we're talking about the actual infrastructure delay part of it here, and we're not talking infrastructure, because that's a whole different trig group that happened, So I want to make sure that we're not, that we're on the same page here, because it sounds like we're treading into infrastructure discussion.
I think maybe though it's about, because we're running into the same challenges that Jamie is raising, for fleets that have never traditionally fueled at their own home bases, that have relied on Pilot or Loves or any other retail charging networks for flexibility and in order to support broad operations regionally, where it's not between here and there. It's not I'm picking up from the factory and dropping off here. It is I'm picking up here one day and going somewhere over there. I'm picking up here a different day and going over there. What does that look like? And how do you apply for an exemption? How do you prove a negative, right? Like there's not coverage right now for that. How do you even begin to plan? How do you begin to demonstrate that the charging operators don't have that underway? It won't be far enough along for you, or that you have contracted in some way with an operator, but they're not that far along. It is an immense challenge if you're starting to say, okay, let's say I need to do X number of vehicles by 2025. What do I need by the end of this year? I need to have an infrastructure contract in hand by December 31st in order to be eligible for that delay. I don't own land. I don't have charging up and running. I don't even know what my charging network should look like. I think there's that I'm trying to, so what paperwork do you gather by the end of this year to prove that you're on track, that you're doing what you're trying to do? Maybe that's actually a real question here for everyone, not just for the network fueling, which I think is a really, really big challenge a lot of folks are facing, and maybe needs a different set of documentation. But for anybody who's been through this process of thinking, what do you need to document for end of year? I mean, December 31st of this year is when we need to have, what is CARB looking for us to have in hand in order to demonstrate that we're on track for infrastructure deadlines by January 1st, 2025.
Yeah. And again, the regulation, the way it's written, and that's what we're talking about, is how do we implement the regulation as it's written. It doesn't provide regional networks. They don't qualify for the infrastructure delay. So if there's lack of public infrastructure, that isn't part of the infrastructure delay. So there's really, as written, the regulation doesn't provide for that. So we need to make sure that we're sticking on track of, what do we do here? So that is actually a separate question. Again, it sounds like we could coordinate with our the infrastructure trig group to talk about the infrastructure needed for those regional networks. But the infrastructure delay extension does not apply to regional networks.
Got you, Jerry. Can I chime in real quick? And we've got a bunch of hands going up, and I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to. So one last comment here, and just a thought to this, throw it in the seed of if we're talking here in this group, what if the network challenge, right, of network available charging is not available. but there is not a suitable solution yet. There is an exemption. Is there an exemption in the fleet that does make that a possible compliance pathway, right? We're talking about how pathways to compliance can be done for these fleets. So if the vehicle or if the infrastructure delay is not the right provision, what would be at that point, right, for that situation, and where that the discussion can foster the recommendation of a document of, in this situation with network charging being inadequate, what is the provision of the rule to or the recommendation by CARB as the appropriate provision to file for, right? So it's not wasting time. You're not building up all of these communication barriers in between things, getting answers to things that is not the appropriate pathway to start your step, right? I think if we can coin this kind of discussion of let's talk about the stepping stones and what stepping stone do we need to jump for in regards to our current challenge or that specific challenge. Jerry, take it away.
All right, so let's go to the next hand. I think Brett was the next hand I saw that went up. So, and you know, Rebecca and Bradley, feel free to jump in with going to the next speaker as well.
Yep.
Well, if I can jump in here really quick, I just want to point out one of the flexibilities of the regulation is the ZEV milestones option. So in cases where regional traffic or travel is necessary, the ZEV milestones options allows for fleets to manage their fleet, the trucks accordingly. So the first milestone is the Group 1 trucks, which typically travel 100 to 150 miles or less per day. And in those situations, we anticipate the trucks to return back to their home base and be able to charge at home versus the large sleeper cab tractors, which travel, you know, hundreds of miles per day. Those that milestone doesn't come into play until 2030. Just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Jimmy, because that, you know, that's kind of what you were saying, Bradley, is that maybe the infrastructure delay extension doesn't give the pathway, but there might be another pathway. And since we're all here talking about it, hey, ZEB milestone, you know, the compliance might be the compliance pathway might be the what we need to look at, as opposed to just focus in on one extension, you know, or exemption. So great point, Jimmy, that there are other options available as well.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll have lots of discussion about options and thoughts on pathways and compliance. Brett, go ahead, bud.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to kind of 3 points. Maybe one isn't really merit of discussion, but just a point I'd like to make. Purchase agreements don't last forever. And so when we're talking about extension delays that go 2 to 5 years, I have trucks that have been built on my lot waiting for sites to be energized for over a year. I have contracts signed with customers and POs from 2021 for trucks that have not been built yet. That puts us at a disadvantage as an OEM from a pricing perspective. As we know, prices have changed drastically in the last 2 years, and also products change over time. So when we're talking about extensions that require a purchase agreement for potentially a product that may change over time, I just would stress the need for flexibility in that process. Second, we've seen really untenable utility contracts for some of my fleet customers, where they are told, and sometimes, you know, you may not have power during these hours. You may have this power available for 2 years, but after that, it's uncertain. And so to ask a customer to sign a contract with a significant level of uncertainty of what that looks like for that specific site, I think really we need to get into the details and clarify how we're holding utilities accountable for my fleet customers to take advantage of these rule provisions. And I can stop and let you ruminate and talk on that, or get to my third one. It's all up to you.
I think that's a great point, Britt. And that's something that we need everyone's help on. You know, it's like us being CARB. What is it? You know, we don't know what do utilities currently provide. There's got to be something that they provide, right? There, I mean, there's got to be a form. There's got to be, and maybe each utility uses something different, but it's basically the same thing. Can we somehow tap into that and make it a more uniform thing? You know, because it doesn't help if someone sends us a 500-page contract and we only need
chime in. To a degree, I see a number of hands. I don't know how many are actually up at the moment. It might be good to get a lot of the comments in. I do feel like this one is probably the infrastructure group. The whole purpose of that is to help facilitate the build out of infrastructure and to coordinate among all of the major agencies and utilities to address those kinds of things. So I want to make sure we don't get sidetracked and then start talking about all the infrastructure items that this group's mission is to do that and to coordinate it.
But I think the point, my point, Tony, is if the rule provision for an extension relating to utility delays has an onus on my customer to provide documentation, I think they are somewhat interrelated. But I respect your opinion on that. It's just, when we talk about what a customer needs to provide to apply for this provision, we always say there's 3,000 utilities. If you know one, you know one. So there's a lot of disparity in their professionalism and how they are handling this transition to ZEV. I'm looking at my colleague's counterpart's face who has a property or has operations in the Salinas Valley. Just how utilities treat different regions within their own district are often very different as well. So that's my piece. The third piece I wanted to bring up regarding having site assessments performed on all of the sites that a customer domiciles their vehicles. I think some clarification around that. As we all know, a lot of our customers do not own their sites. They lease, or a lot of fleets. I keep saying my customers, I apologize. A lot of the fleets are not owners of their sites. They lease their sites. And so there's, again, an additional layer that needs to be considered in that during that process.
Is it a good spot to kind of prompt the ideas from this group to talk about ways we think that utilities can help contribute information for fleet success in that light? Brett, to your comment about site feasibility assessments, what level of understanding do fleet managers have with regard to who they're supposed to contact at those utilities, and what utility specifically is affecting the site that they're looking to actually get electrified? Is a resource there of the contact person and program available for that IOU or for that private utility? Is a resource warranted to be able to bring together to say this is the resource document if you're looking at infrastructure and you're running into an issue with infrastructure and you're expecting to do an infrastructure delay? These are the people you're calling first and foremost. And to add to that, a standardized application or check boxes, right? Of what is the expectation of a fleet manager to be able to say, step one, you don't have the site evaluation, so you can't go any further in submitting for this provision until you have the site eval, right? So
Bradley, I think you're 100% right. And I know that there's a lot of efforts underway, especially for us as an OEM consulting services we offer customers. But I'm waiting for Tony to hop off mute to say that this may be an infrastructure working group question to a degree. And I think there's definitely a lot of that's happening here. But as we look at it from a rule provision perspective, my concern is that you have a very, very critical stakeholder entity in this process, which is the utilities, which get to kind of be the little bit of a kingmaker and puppet master. And I don't mean to say that derogatorily towards them, but they hold the cards in my customer's ability to be successful if they need to utilize this rule provision. And that is a very disadvantaged place for somebody trying to do the right thing and trying to navigate these waters to be in.
Maybe could you give a little bit more detail? You mentioned timelines in terms of having vehicles sitting on your lots, Daimler lots, for years now. So what does that look like? Customer puts it in order on date X. What have they gone through? How far have they gotten? Maybe do you have something that would be helpful for CARB to maybe understand a bit more about that?
Well, I would say, and broadly for this group, as an OEM, we definitely had a vehicle first mentality. early on in consulting with our customers, especially with the prevalence of incentive dollars that were available in the state of California to navigate this transition. Of recent, I can go ahead and say we have an infrastructure first philosophy. As we know, it takes 18 months at best case scenario for any site of any reasonable size to deploy trucks. And so this concept of having a PO in hand to obtain any infrastructure dollars, I can build you a truck much faster than you can energize the site. Our longest backlog time for diesels doesn't even scratch the surface compared to some of the deployment timelines we've seen with customers today for site energization. So I don't know if that answers your question, Rebecca. I can't get into too specific details on my customer sites. But 3 years, we have some waiting on 3 years to energize. And that is with our paid e-consulting services, shepherding them along the way.
Great. And I think for energization, the PO is not necessary up front. But I was, trying to get a sense of, especially on the construction side where you need the PO first. And in theory, the energy is going to be available, but I still think that maybe being able to show what some of those challenges are and what some of the paperwork looks like, especially because you have that kind of in-house support for your customers to move through the whole process. But, if we need to have a PO first under this rule, and you need to have the construction underway, but you don't need the PO for the energization. For that side, if you can prove your utility doesn't have enough power available, you don't have to go through with that PO. And I think one of the things is we don't know clearly when the PO would have to be placed under this rule yet. That would be something I think would be helpful to get clarity on from CARB as part of this process. But for let's say you do have power, in theory, from the utility, you have a contract. What timelines are you seeing? You're placing the order, you have the construction. How long is this taking for your customers, and how long is this sitting on your lot?
Yeah, I can, in current state environment, Rebecca, I can build a truck much faster than they can energize. So if we know when the utility is committed to site energization, I can put that truck into my order books accordingly and have it built and delivered in parallel with site energization. Again, we had a very strong vehicle first mentality in the past, as I think a lot of other OEMs did, and I don't think we're unique in having completed trucks waiting for site energization. So regarding the PO piece of it, I couldn't envision a scenario of any of my customers spending the time, money, and energy to energize a site with no intention of putting a truck there. So it's kind of moot in my opinion.
All right, thanks, Brett. Let's I think the next hand up, correct me if I'm wrong, was Mike Tunnel, but maybe somebody saw that the order of hands that came up, if they could chime us in. Mike, go ahead, sir.
You bet. Thank you. So, just following up on Brett's comment, this question of multi-facilities and how you have to go about gaining compliance there. I think it follows up with Rebecca's kind of time frame question. How does a fleet with multiple facilities come into compliance and are eligible for these extensions? What are the steps, as well as what's the role of public infrastructure? What's reasonable to ask a fleet if they're deeming public infrastructure being an option? Those are kind of the questions I'm seeing, and I think there's a need for clear direction from CARB on those topics.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Mike. And I think Rebecca and I had a same and similar question in our own minds when we were talking about this first meeting and preparing, was what is reasonable to expect from a fleet to be able to report for this rule provision, right? Is it unreasonable to ask for a certain specific document, or is it reasonable to expect that any fleet that's working through the process in building infrastructure is going to have this information ready, right? So keeping in mind that a lot of this information is still new to a lot of fleet managers, and if we can share what that information is descriptively, or there's recommendations provided by CARB as a guidance document. Sarah, you mentioned, I think, in the introduction about a guidebook is a guide to be able to walk you through or provide those stepping stones into the process of, you get to step one, and then the answer leads you to the next step and to the next step and the next step. And is that something that's useful? It says, is there a want to be able to provide a resource like that in polling the group here?
I would just add, so, and then one other part of that might be a partial energized facility too. But just to address your questions, yeah, I think, earlier it was mentioned there's an FAQ document online. Well, the FAQs don't really have the questions. They're just white papers, more or less. And I think we really need to get the FAQs out there, because I'm talking to people and they're asking the same questions I'm asking, and none of us are able to really, we're getting individual answers, but it'd be nice to have a single place to reference that. And hopefully through this process, we'll get to that type of information out there. My last suggestion, then I'll pass it on, is we really need enforcement, and maybe they are as part of this conversation too, because what has happened in the past, and hopefully will not happen this time, is that the rule writers interpret it or mean one thing, the enforcement are more black and white, and it's just like, this is what it says, this is how it's enforced. So just making sure we're saying the same thing between and interpreting it as individuals trying to comply with the regulation. We got to make sure that what is said is the same thing as what is understood.
So Mike, with regards to your question, fleet owners with multiple sites where vehicles are domiciled must submit a copy of each site's infrastructure capacity evaluation from the utility or a third-party licensed professional electrical engineer, with the information required to be submitted in sections as per sections 2015.3C to C3 and 4 in the regulation. We are going to continually put out more information to provide fleet holders and stakeholders with the information they need to help comply with the regulation.
Thank you, Jimmy. And just one follow-up. So for tier 1 fleets, what's the time frame for that submittal?
For tier 1 fleets, you mean milestone group 1?
Yes.
I think it may be 1 year ahead of time.
So
yeah, it's 1 year before the next compliance date.
In the next 2 weeks, they need to have every site submitted.
Right.
Not submitted, but they need to have every documentation for every single site.
Every single site. So is that reasonable?
Yeah,
that's okay.
Yeah, I think it is reasonable.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's
but
what
I think that's helpful information to me, because I really thought that was the case, but I didn't want to think that's the case. So, but that's a great example of how the clarity of information we need to get out, that if if you're not getting all your sites assessed in the next 2 weeks as a tier 1 fleet, you're not necessarily eligible for the electrification exemption. Is that an accurate statement? I don't know, but maybe you can tell me.
Mike, I do want to bring to the group's awareness as well. I don't know how many people on this call are listening in, were able to listen into the outreach call earlier this morning. But that outreach team was discussing, calendar outreach. There's a calendar to be able to be published on important compliance dates and times. That those are very much relevant, materials that we all need, and we are on a very tight timeline. To Rebecca's point, to your point, it's weeks away for a certain decision for moving forward. And what do fleets need to know in what is lacking? Mike, you mentioned on the FAQs, it's more of a kind of a back and a relevant white paper type of discussion piece. What's the temperature here of the panelists reviewing those FAQs for the things that have not been answered? What are the highest level questions of, I need to do this, but that's not addressed in the FAQ? We're not trying to source every single possible question, but what are the most popular FAQs that haven't been addressed yet? Can we come up with those in this group to bring forward those level of inclusion of the FAQs? Need to have additional information that's more guidance for the regulation and submitting for this rule provision. Is that something that sounds like it would be helpful? I'm seeing nodding heads. Okay, awesome.
For the infrastructure piece specifically, maybe to shift it to, I think we all know where it doesn't work. What has worked? What is the first step that has worked for you? And what is the type of thing that should be recommended in terms of that first step for anybody trying to undertake compliance with ACF?
All right.
Why don't we take the next hand here?
Yeah, I was gonna say, who's next up on the hand?
I think it was Mitchell.
Okay.
I think it was, but forgive me, but we'll throw it to Mitchell here. Or is it Morgan? I'm sorry, Morgan Mitchell.
Yeah.
I'm
Thank
sorry.
So I don't know if we're really that unique in representation on this situation, but my area is very remote, and there is an incredible amount of solar leases that are going up, as well as massive industry. So our grid is maxed. I mean, absolutely maxed. And we know it's maxed because we've tried to add in additional solar plants to benefit district infrastructure, as well as ag and oil industry processing plants that are in our area sharing the same power grid. So when we're talking about delay extensions, we're practically looking at a situation where any growth or any addition that we could even possibly hope for is beyond the end of this extension. Not only that, but it would cost unknown millions and millions of dollars. I understand that there's funding available, but once you spread that funding out to the whole state and come to our little area of Kern County, it wouldn't even put a dent in just the smallest expansions that we've already been denied from PG&E. So what does CARB say to that? I mean, we've talked to utilities, and this is even predating this when we're trying to do other projects. How do we convince a monstrosity like PG&E to increase availability out there just so we can charge 20 plus vehicles on an already overstressed grid infrastructure, and then still be able to be in compliance when the sunset of these extensions are only 5 years out?
Tony or Jerry, can CARB speak to the understanding of what the CPUC is requiring for utilities to be able to provide in relation to demand requests for electric vehicle infrastructure in the state? Is that a relevant kind of topic to follow up with Morgan's concern here? Because if there is, our exemption rule provision for infrastructure delay is maxed out at 5 years, but PG&E in certain rural areas doesn't feasibly expect to have anything there in 10. What is that level of concern then for, there's nothing that a fleet can do at that point versus it's the onus on the utility or it's CPUC?
Well, I think I think what we have to be careful, Bradley, here, that we're walking the fine line of this is, again, this is treading on to, is a part of the infrastructure trig group, because CPUC is actually going to be presenting at, I'm sorry, the PUC is going to be presenting at the next trig meeting, so that would be a good place to listen in on that. But also, we're trying to have discussion on implementing the regulation as it's written, and that's how it's written right now. It's like there's nothing we can do about how it's written. So you shouldn't be going down the path of, well, what happens if that's not in the regulation, because there is no way to address that.
Yeah, I don't
Color to the response. Our board directed us and approved the extension at the 5-year window, with us going back to the board long before the 5-year window ends as to what the situation is. We'll actually have to we plan to and will be putting information out on the extension requests, and basic information about it, so that everybody will have a better sense as to what's kind of going on over the next several years. So what can the utility, PUC, and all those people do? That's what that infrastructure group is supposed to do to make this whole thing better than it currently is, and to streamline things. So I kind of want to make sure don't venture into that, because they'll just eat up all the time of the meeting.
I understand that.
Yeah.
So where I'm coming from is not necessarily the how. It's more of what information can we provide? What can we change in this, the way that this is worded? Because I know Nick Blair can actually probably give better information on the number of districts and water districts and special districts in the state of California that are in rural areas and have very limited power supply. So how can we get information to them that helps all of these districts understand that there's a way to respond and react to this? Is it going to be updating FAQs? Is it going to be working towards some sort of better understanding? Or, I mean, the questions are really endless.
And since I'm talking, I guess I'm thinking a homework assignment for this group is look at the FAQs that we have on this topic and say, okay, these cover some of our questions, but some of these bigger questions are missed. We can always add or expand those FAQs or address them in different ways. But I mean, the short answer is, yeah, start with the utility, get something in writing, and the rule we basically have it laid out is, if you want to move forward with the project in good faith, the utility is going to be able to respond with what they can and cannot do, if they have a pretty good idea of what you want to do. And as you mentioned, it's there are things that are going to be fairly site specific. Even if you're in the same region, it might be easy to serve one node and not another, and so that's part of the process, and the rule as written allows that to be a consideration. If you go to the utility, again, you're doing all this a year ahead of the deadline, and here's what I want to do, and the utility says can't, then get that in writing is pretty much what it is. So yeah, I want to let others have their chance to comment. I'll stop it.
I had a follow question to that in regard to, beyond just a timeline concern of the infrastructure itself from the utility, but in the description of the provision requirements for reporting, there needed to be a understanding of the annual kilowatt demand, right? And the provision there. Is the expectation, and maybe this be the clarifying guidance or expectation from utilities, is that the ask from fleet is going to be an annual ask that they cannot comply with, or is it their a larger depot facility that needs a substantial amount of kilowatt hour available by year 8 or 9 in a fleet's plan? If a fleet says to the utility, I need to be able to get 5 megawatts at a specific site, and the utility comes back and says we can't do that, is there an expectation that the utility would be able to do a certain amount at that site on an alternative plan that the fleet would then have to be a plan B submission, I guess, at that point? Is that a clear enough interpretation of how the rule is written there with the annual kilowatt ask?
In short, I believe so. But there are areas that I think we want to explore a little better as how to do that best. The whole idea is you submit an application to the utility. Here's what I need to do over the next 5 years, or whatever your time horizon is. The utility is like, well, you want to do 50 trucks, but we can provide enough power to run 20 of them now. But to do the 50, it's going to be 4 years. Then that's what we would look at in looking at the extension, and then use that as the basis. So the whole concept is, we're going to give you extensions for what you would otherwise be out of compliance if you couldn't do it, because it's not your fault, basically, is kind of the idea. But if you can do 20, we still are going to make you do the 20 or want you to move forward, as the for instance. And so we do specify there that, you know, we would want the utility to do that, and they likely would lay out, here's how we can serve your load. And it might be we can't do anything for 2 years, and then in year 2 we can, and then year 5 we can do the rest. That's what we're looking to see. And since my team right now doesn't have copies of applications from the utilities or information, and we know that I don't even know how many different utilities there are, but we have to deal with absolutely every one of them, I'm sure, at some point. So it's not just the big three; it's going to be all the little ones, the MIDs and TIDs and NCPA and all these other utilities, and I'm sure they do things differently. So I'm not sure if this is the group or if as a group we should kind of say, hey, you know what, getting some well, we have, just to make sure, I guess everybody's on the same page, we have options here and what we think we can and or should do in terms of other meetings. We've been approached by a group of utilities like, hey, you know, we do things differently, but we think doing them the same for fleet owners, if we all have the same expectations, that could make things easier for them, can make it easier for fleet owners, and frankly, would make things easier for us. So that might be a sort of a win-win-win. I guess we'll try to touch bases with our infrastructure team as to how to do that, and maybe just have a separate meeting on that topic, or invite them as guests or something like that to work through some details.
I was going to say it may be warranted for us to have a joint meeting at a certain point with another work group in collaborating and discussing those things and break down the silos, so to speak, because I think we're all listening in on all of these groups. So yeah. Good food for thought for some future discussions.
And Bradley and Rebecca, we're quickly approaching actually 1 hour on this topic here. Goodness. So yeah, so I want to open up the chat to the general attendees so that they can start dropping in, so we can get a feel for what their concerns might be while we continue taking some of the next hands that are raised here. But just want to give you a time check that, yeah, we're at about 45 minutes on this topic right now. All right.
Jerry, we're at 45 minutes and I still haven't heard anybody talking about the documentation we're able to get. And I'll tell you, as somebody who's worked on a lot of these projects, there's a lot of times I can't get it, but it would be, I think that if we're talking about getting an exemption, it sounds like you need some form of something written, and it would be great to hear whether that's reasonable, how that's reasonable, where that's reasonable.
Yeah.
The variety of what exists right now among participants in this group, to be able to give you guys a flavor of the challenges we're facing.
I think that would be great, Rebecca, if we could talk about that, because as Tony mentioned, we haven't received an application yet, so we don't have anything to base we don't have anything to base our expectations on. So yeah, tell us what are you seeing out there? What paperwork are you getting? What are they telling you? All that, that would be great. We want to hear, we don't want this to be a one way. Everyone's asking, what's CARB going to do for this? What's CARB, we want the discussion to be open for everyone. So yeah, I think that's great, Rebecca. Why don't we get some information on that? All right, and I don't know if some of the existing raised hands have that information. But
Becca, I don't know. I guess one of my questions is, do you think that part of the reason you haven't received any applications for infrastructure delay is maybe because people they aren't clear on exactly what you want, or they aren't able to obtain it?
Well, I mean, I don't want to speculate on why people are doing what they're doing or aren't doing, but we do get a lot of questions at workshops, meetings, in the ZEV Fleet email. But no one has told us to date that they haven't been able to obtain paperwork.
So
Yeah.
can I give you a real world example of
Yeah, please
a
do.
situation where one of our trucking customers
Yeah, 'cause we want to understand why people can't get
okay, so
included. Yeah.
so we had a drayage customer who had a large number of EVs on order. They leased the site where they keep their trucks at the port of LA, and they embarked on the electrification process with SoCal Edison, and initially the landlord was playing ball, and everything was going in the right direction. And then when they finally got to the point where there was actually an infrastructure plan in place, and the fleet was about to sign the agreement, the electrification agreement with Edison, and the landlord had to be party to that because there's an easement. The landlord read it and they're like, we will not do this. So in that situation, the fleet now has no ability to install anything on that property because the landlord is prohibiting it. The power was available and they would have been able to move forward with the utility, but it's the landlord that's blocking it. So in that situation, what should they do?
They should reach out to us and give us that information.
No, but this is like what would number one, based on my read of the rule, that would not qualify for an extension. And so I and I know we're not talking about changing the rules. I'm not trying to do that. But I really am not. I just want to know if that doesn't qualify for an extension, the next option would be accessing a public access network. If that public access network is not available because the construction is delayed or whatever, that also doesn't provide them an extension. So would the proper thing for that fleet to do be just to buy the truck and let it sit on their lot until they find a new property or their lease is up and they can go, lease a new property? From a practical standpoint, what do they do?
Well, clearly the regulation is not written so that someone purchases a truck and just lets it sit there to meet but you are correct in your reading that there is no there's no flexibility for the regulation. Doesn't have a provision for lease sites, that the landlord denies the electrification on that site. So site control isn't one of the reasons for the extension, but again, there are other options, other compliance pathways that then we would need to that we need to understand, and we need to
so Jerry, like what would that be if this fleet only has Group 1 trucks? What would that path be? Because we're like 3 weeks away from January 1st, and I have thousands of customers that are impacted by this reg, and I mean, I think it was, I don't know whose point earlier, but if January 1st is truly the deadline for submitting it for Group 1 fleets.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for that question. And that's one of the reasons why we're here talking about it. But
do you think that maybe CARB could issue a regulatory advisory to provide a one-time extension for allowing at least, an additional 6 months for the extraordinary circumstances that the calendar is the calendar?
Well, again, we're not here. We're not here to discuss what's not in the regulation, and that's not in the regulation, and that's not something that we can do. But you should reach out to us. If we can get the information from the fleet, then we can look into it further and see what options are available. So that's the main thing is don't not talk to us. Send an email to ZEV Fleet let us look at the situation, the specific situation, and then we can decide what, you know, if there are any options and what those might be. But unfortunately, you know, if we wait until the last minute to come talk to us, then it also limits our options. But as the situation that you are bringing up, there is no good answer that I can provide. But we do want to hear from you on what that fleet is, and we'll do that. You know, we can do that offline. We can.
Yeah.
Would there be an option for like? Would there be an option to post? Because one of the challenges is like there's no common place for people to know like what are the unaddressed issues. So like, you know, if there's like on, you know, the fact sheet or saying, you know, landlord disapproval of electrification, you know, that this issue has been identified or submitted 100, 1,000, whatever, 10, whatever the number is. But so that data starts getting collected and is also accessible by the public, so people can see, oh, I'm not the only one having this problem, and then maybe we identify that as an area of the regulation that we need to work on and find a solution so that it doesn't, because really what that fleet is looking at is they're going to have to go out of compliance, or they buy the anchor, you know, the unusable paperweight of a truck that they can't fuel or, you know, put in power anywhere.
Question for Carb here, just in relation to, I want to make sure that there's the information available to all of us here with regard to when one provision would not be suitable for a specific situation, when and where perhaps another provision could step in, right? So if a daily usage exemption at that point is the considerate pathway for a fleet to be filing in lieu of infrastructure, whereas the infrastructure that is not available is making making that fleet's particular situation unsuitable for their daily usage of the vehicle, right? Where the nearest infrastructure that they could feasibly use is too far away, right? And in that context, is that the stepping stone away from an infrastructure delay extension where it's a year in advance, but rather it's a daily usage exemption provision until they can find a suitable infrastructure network. Again, we kind of go back to the network piece. So is that in the context of the FAQ documents and things like that, is that something that can be kind of bridged, right? Where there's a broad understanding of these provisions, but also, you know, in a situation whereas there's optional alternative pathways for provisions and filings.
And yeah, that's a great point, Bradley. And that's kind of what we're saying is that, you know, maybe this doesn't apply, but we need to know the situation to see what options are available. And that's why we, you know, this forum isn't to talk about fleet specific, you know, situations, but we do have that available to everyone by emailing us, and then we can start talking about, well, this might not apply, but if you use the milestone option, you can do this, or like you mentioned, you know, there might be a different exemption or extension that could work. That's definitely what we set up the ZEB Fleet email for. And as you heard, the replies come quick. You know, it's not like we sit on them. They are provided in a reasonable amount of time. But also we're building our fact sheets and the video modules that we're building. We are mentioning, hey, you know, if this is the situation, then this might apply to you. Go watch this module or go read this fact sheet. So we are trying to provide pathways, you know, or the breadcrumbs for people to find what they need, you know. So yeah.
Yeah. And so Lacey, in your example, I'm interested in knowing more about the fleet, not per se at this meeting, but I'd like to follow up. Because there are a lot of things going on. And again, I don't have the details, but where they're located probably matters. There have been contracts issued for millions, if not billions of dollars to build out a pretty substantial network in Southern California in the next couple of years. And so the retail option might be a decent option. But again, depends on the timing and some other things. So, and as you guys know, I mean, we're looking at zero emission. So, predominantly we generally tend to focus on battery electric, but there are fuel cell options already available and more coming. And that would, to a degree, be a potential solution depending on this situation too. But at the same time, as you kind of touched on, yeah, the rule, we try to cover a lot of different situations. We know it didn't cover absolutely everything. So we want to make sure it's clear. Here's what fits and here's what doesn't. And then here's how you go about it. And so that you do it effectively and efficiently and so on. And that we can get you responses in writing quickly. And I guess I'll throw in a comment, concern about enforcement versus implementation folks having different perspectives or something along those lines. I mean, one, we closely coordinate with our enforcement team, but things like exemptions and extensions that we would be issuing, one, we're going to put them in writing. And I do not recall ever having a situation, again, over to 15 years, or maybe I haven't been here forever, that we put something in writing as, yeah, you qualified for the extension, here's what it is. Because frankly, we track it in the reporting system. Just in case people aren't aware, we actually track which truck has an exception when our enforcement people might be pulling trucks over or doing audits. They have real-time access to trucks that have been recognized for an extension. And if they have, they're just checking, hey, are the conditions that apply still being met? Is the kind of thing they check. They don't question the fact that our agency issued an extension. In that case, it's something amiss, or that kind of thing.
Tony, just for clarity, so that is visible to the fleet as well in truckers. So the fleet will see in there in truckers, it'll say by VIN, this VIN, or what vehicles were granted an extension, and it's the same on
the general answer is yes. I mean, it does depend on the compliance option. So if it's like, hey, I need to buy 10 vehicles and I can't under the milestone option, and I need exemptions to allow me to buy 10 ICE vehicles, that still has to be done in the future. We'll give them something in writing, and once you receive the vehicles, it's like, hey, I'm reporting now, I had this extension, I got these vehicles, these are ICE vehicles, not zero emission, but this is the reason it's cool. That's all kind of, we try to spell that out as much as we can in the rule itself, but in the FAQs, we did that too. And then like the infrastructure extension isn't always vehicle specific, just like the utility example you used of, hey, I went to the utility, I'm not going to buy trucks because the utility's not going to do anything for 4 years. We're not tying that to any one vehicle per se. So in that case, we wouldn't mark an extension for any one vehicle, but we would have to recognize it so that the fleet would show as compliant with the exception.
And then when you submit an extension request, do you guys do it on your end that it's reflected in the system, or does that a separate action that the fleet needs to take as a part of their reporting, and then you guys confirm it? That's where I'm just a little confused.
I don't know. That's why we have this provisions group, because these are structured a little differently. So I'm gonna do an easy one just for everybody's benefit. So backup vehicles, I don't think we need to have a discussion on that. That is, hey, this vehicle is going to do less than 1,000 miles this year. Give me the odometer reading, mark it as a backup vehicle, save it, and you're done. There's nothing else to do. And then next year, report your odometer reading. So there's no process. It's just a reporting detail, for lack of a better term. The infrastructure one and the purchase one, it's like, no. Those are much more complex. There's more to them. It's like, all right, here's the situation. Here's all the information about the vehicle I want to replace. Here's what I try to go buy and I can't get it. Here's the information via email. We have to look at all of it. We have to go. We're at this point, one of the steps is we specified in the rule we potentially will put online. Here is what the extension request is. They're saying they can't buy this truck. any manufacturer or upfitter that says they can, here's enough information. If you identify yourself as able to do it, we'll refer them to you. And obviously, we're not going to approve an extension in that case. And if nobody steps forward or we can't identify a truck that's out there, then we'll grant the extension. I mean, that's the gist of it. And so that idea of putting it online and even who to contact and how to do it in an efficient manner, the rule doesn't specify the details of how we do it, but it does say we're going to put it out for getting feedback, predominantly manufacturers and upfitters and dealers. So even standardizing that particular process, is something that we yet need to develop. And my opinion is it would be pretty helpful to get feedback from this group on how to do that as a mechanism. But in the rule, we do specify exactly what you need to provide. It's in the fact sheet. And nothing prohibits us from getting other information. So if you said, hey, here's the required information, but here's something that makes this easier to follow or supports the information I'm providing, we'll take it, but we can't say you have to give it to us. But and again, when we say here's what you need to provide, it's like, well, sure, there's going to be some variables as to what you need to provide, because it really depends on the specific situation. But the rule does identify here are the criteria, and as I kind of mentioned earlier, when we're talking to some public fleets, it's like, well, we don't get these. I can't think of a good example. They do purchase orders, but let's just say, yeah, we don't get purchase orders. We do these things. It's like, okay, but it's the same thing. You have a different name for it, but in principle, is you're ordering a vehicle and you have a different name for it, then that's fine. You're still ordering the vehicle, and that's enough proof and things like that. So those are some of the things that I'm hoping to get a little more info from the groups as well, so that when we do either the training modules or FAQs for state and local government fleets and even federal, it's like, yeah, here's terminology you guys are more familiar with, and I'm not going to use the terminology on the high priority fleet FAQs. That's the same as for public fleets, potentially just for ease of interpretation and stuff like that.
Jerry, we're right at the 2:45 mark that we talked about, but there's 3 people with hands still up. Do we want to try and finish those out before we move on to the next topic? I want to make sure everybody's got a chance to have
minimum here, the comments or questions.
I was going to say, if we can make them as comments,
we'll see how long we talk,
take
right?
them. Yeah, if we could take them as comments and then we can follow up as needed, that would be good. But yeah, I think we should let the folks who raised their hand a while ago at least make their comment.
All right, then it'd be Suzanne.
Thank you. Well, I posted, I guess you could say, the majority of my comment in the text box, but I really just had a problem and proposed solution for discussion. Well, the infrastructure delay exemption allows a specific additional time frame to execute infrastructure for circumstances that are outside the fleet's control. And this is in relation to obtaining a construction permit due to delays from the entity that's processing this construction permit. If that specific additional time frame is exceeded because the entity processing the construction permit is not able to deliver it beyond the fleet's control, the fleet is out of compliance. So the solution I've identified, which seems in reach without changing the regulation, it doesn't mean it's the most effective, is for CARB to consider issuing an advisory to public agencies that process these construction permits to encourage their entity to prioritize these type of applications. My thought is that this type of advisory might create discussion at these entities that issue the construction permits that might lead to it may lead to a type of fast track processing that might circumvent fleet delays to obtain a construction permit. So that's my first comment. And then my other comment, because I kind of starting to understand the nature of how these conversations are going to go, is really just a request for the chairs and staff of CARB to consider. Can this group submit problems and propose solutions in advance where you all can categorize them into different issues and maybe even just kind of maybe identify what the level of reach is? We're only meeting 4 times a year, and I know that a lot of folks here probably didn't know exactly how to prepare for this. And, it's going to be 4 months, 3 months before we talk again. So just a thought.
No, absolutely. and you got a lot of nodding heads there, and you got a thumbs up for me, but also, and we'll probably, before we start talking about the ZEV extension, we also have a question for not just the panel, but also the entire call, and get the cadence and other trig groups have been commenting on the same thing of, is quarterly enough? Is it, do we need to meet more often and for a different duration? So that's coming up, and we're definitely going to have the debrief after this meeting with the decision to move forward with a modified schedule, perhaps based off of feedback. So
yeah, that's great suggestion, Suzanne. And like Bradley said, we're gonna ask that question, but we were kind of figuring it out as well. This is our first meeting. This is our first meeting too. So we're but I think, yeah, we want to maximize our time and have a strong discussion during the time we have. So yeah.
And we do have an expectation to leave this meeting understanding the next set of meetings would have a standardized agenda to keep us all on schedule, as well as published information prior to that meeting. So we're all kind of on the same page, thinking about the next steps forward. So thank you, Suzanne. All right.
I'll
I think
Nick 30-second blip here just to throw in. The governor's office, the GoBiz group, is specifically trying to streamline the permitting process for medium and heavy duty electrification efforts. So they're actively doing that and working with various jurisdictions. I know that they were part of the infrastructure group meeting, but we'll just take that away. Somebody has actually actively been for more than a year now trying to make that process better, to enable this whole market to grow the way it needs to.
Thank you, Tony. Nick?
Thanks. Yeah, I'll try to be brief. So question I have, I'm hoping, is more focused on implementation of how exemptions are maybe processed. So I think Morgan had noted that for his district in the Fresno area, in dealing with PG&E, they've basically been told that there is not the capacity to add any more infrastructure that will enable them to electrify. And I think I saw in the comments, one of my other members from Calaveras was saying along the same lines. And I guess, Tony had mentioned that there's going to be a lot of build out in Southern California, but in the event that you have folks that are in areas that build out is not imminent, I'm curious, for the sake of streamlining exemption requests, and I think this could not only be for infrastructure, but for the other categories, is there the ability to machine learn in a way where if Morgan makes a request like that and it goes through, that there's a flag for, hey, in this area, that's a challenge. And then maybe if there are other agencies or entities in that area, it's like, oh, okay, like there's been other requests similar to this. So maybe hopefully that can streamline it along if there is a real world issue there. And hopefully that can mitigate some of the time it takes on the side of CARB staff. Because I know throughout this process, a lot of my members were concerned that there'd be exemption requests of all kinds piling up, and how to streamline and get through that quickly. It was, something we needed to explore. So happy to pause at that.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And you bring an interesting perspective to what utility providers may be able to help in fleets streamlining the process to be able to give quicker, faster feedback to CARB, right? Is there, and it's more of a regional piece rather than it is a fleet specific request, right? We know that, in a certain area, a IOU is not going to be able to provide in X amount of time that level of support, right? And just in general, right? It's kind of like a heat map, I guess, is what we would like to, if the utility can provide a heat map of the areas that are just not going to be available, don't try. Or is that kind of what your thought was, or?
Yeah, it was. And I know that, we're kind of treading a line here of not dancing in the infrastructure subgroups terrain, but my thinking for the sake of, actually feasibly going through these exemption requests as they come, it's probably good to have this in mind. And if there is the ability on the back end to use this to inform different staff that might be, responding to different requests. They have that information before them to hopefully make an informed decision.
Yeah, and I will I'll be right there to say this is definitely not in the realm of the infrastructure group, because we're talking about streamlining the process for the provision in the infrastructure itself, right? And it really does come down to the brass tacks of being able to discuss what utility providers are reasonably expecting to provide to fleets in response to those requests, right? So, and is that something that could this group could help to I guess sequester from utility providers? Is what's the interest in being able to provide mapped areas of infrastructure projects at a certain level that are just not going to have, instead of having a although I might be interpreting that provision incorrectly, because Tony, I believe it is calling out specifically that there has to be an application, correct? So there, oh, you're muted, Tony. I knew that was going to happen one time this meeting.
Yeah. Yes. Pretty much the answer is yes. So generally, there's going to be an application from the utility to move forward with a project that takes multiple years to do. There are going to be instances, and it was anticipated in the way we wrote the rule, is you're going to get a notification from the utility that they cannot move forward at the moment. And I know there's some detailed language, but I already forgot about it, the nuance associated with it. Right. So if they can't move forward, they will still provide something in writing as to what the situation. There was a specific utility that raised that at one of our workshops and board hearing, and so we wrote it in. Let me throw out two statements. So your theory on whether the utility can do their map or not because it's regional is one theory. My theory is that it's node specific and site specific. And so having the actual address and location matters, because I'm aware of a site where they could not serve it from one side of the street, but they could serve the load from the other corner of the street. And that made a difference to the utility in a big way. So
I think it was in the context of the I guess to Nick and to Morgan's comments, the rural areas, right? Where there's quite literally not enough power in that area on the grid to be able to run, and that's where the faster streamlined situations like that become helpful, where the utility can identify with 100% certainty in a 5-year time frame for anything over a certain kilowatt.
Yeah, I just want to throw another item into the pot. Is one of the things we will be doing is providing the utilities with all the fleet type information that we do have, so they can plan for expanding the grid and the nodes and all the different aspects to serve those loads. So again, that doesn't happen overnight,
right?
But in the near term, they'll be looking to and planning based on where the fleets are and what the fleets have to do, where today they can't do that until the fleet brings it to their attention.
That's great information, Tony. Is that the ACT data that was submitted that's going to be shared, or is that what CARB is collected otherwise on just vehicle capacity?
Yeah, almost anything CARB has in its possession. And so when we get all the reporting this next year, we'll have that, and we'll be sharing that. There's a bill that requires it. I mean, so it's not just a random decision here.
Yeah,
so again, the legislature is thinking ahead. It's like, yeah, let's get this data into the utilities' hands directly, into the Energy Commission hands directly, so that these kinds of things can be streamlined long term, and processes smooth out.
Okay, awesome.
Tony,
there's a lot of
data. Like, what reporting data were you talking about? Is it from ACF, or is it what data are you talking about?
Gist of it, well, any regulation that we're collecting fleet information, so it's going to be the ACF data, the truck and bus data we already have, the data for the Clean Truck Check program, off-road equipment stuff, all of it.
The one-time reporting, advanced clean trucks?
No, one-time reporting is history. That's history. We're going to report what's new. I mean, here's the new information we have. I mean, to a large degree, they have access to the one-time reporting, but that is history, and it doesn't tell anybody, honestly, what your actual plans are. We can tell, here's the fleet that has trucks, and presumably even some information about the gist of the location. Doesn't mean that strategically you're going to start there. You might start at a different location completely. So if you're in PG&E and Edison area, you might do more of your stuff in the Southern California area before you focus to the Northern California part, or vice versa. And So there is additional information for planning purposes, but at least knowing where the fleets are and which ones are required to move forward is going to provide the utilities and the Energy Commission and others a lot better information as to where infrastructure is needed, retail wise, and even on site, and where the grid has to be expanded and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know that William from Ryder has been patiently waiting for quite a while.
Hey, thanks for that, Rebecca. And I meant to respond to you earlier when you asked, what's the first step? But first off, great discussions. So I'm, in my area of influence, I operate fixed-based operations, right? And I've decided we're going to get this done with the way the rules are written now, but I've also made a decision to outsource the heavy lifting to get this done, right? So I think, this is to me, it's about a punch list of everything it has to get done. I'm looking forward to an FAQ, but at some point in time, I know that we may have to submit a exemption or extension. Is there any provisioning for showing, like providing examples under certain scenarios of what a successful extension or exemption submission looks like? Because, I think to alleviate frustration by fleet owners, operators, from them submitting and it gets rejected because they didn't submit enough data or this or that. I think that's going to be important for those who, decide to go on their own. Me, I just partnered with a company. I'm doing this on East Coast, West Coast right now, right? So what I've done is I partner with experts who successfully navigated the challenges that all of this, some of which were discussed earlier in, today, to get this done, right? So, these experts, they understand the requirements, they understand the rules, the requirements to build out the infrastructure, to acquire vehicles, to upfit them into, I'm even financing my vehicles through my partners. So they're taking me from beginning to end, but they also have relationships with the utilities. So they know who's who with the utilities. They know who's with the agencies. They're communicating back and forth. They know how to leverage incentives, so that it's lowering my cost. They can project manage, site surveys on company owned or leased, and they help me to get my landlords on my lease properties to understand why it's a benefit to them. Fortunately, we've been able to overcome some of the issues like Lucy has dealt with where the landlord just said no. Initially, my landlord said no, but when my partner got involved with them, they got to yes, right? So, and then, they oversaw all of the site surveys throughout California. They go through the permitting process for me. They hire the contractors. They oversee the construction, and then in service and all of that stuff for me. So I'm fortunate. I'm fortunate. I've been down this road quite a few times before, and I think any resource, I opted to outsource, to get this done with two really strong partners. I'm sure Carb's familiar with one of them. But for those who are not, I think, if there's some kind of examples that fleet operators could have, or the people who need to apply for exemption extensions, that they see what it looks like, so they're not wasting their time, right? And they don't get frustrated.
That's a great point. That's a great point, William. That and again, like Tony had mentioned, and what we've cited before, yes, we are definitely trying to put everything we can into the fact sheets, into the modules, our outreach program to help everyone who is affected by this regulation, and that's part of the discussion that we'll continue working on through this process as well. Is what do you need from to make things more streamlined, to help everyone. It not only helps the affected community, but it also helps us in the processing these. So that is definitely something that we're going to be looking into and providing as much assistance as we can, you know, that's available to us to help the affected community.
Will, what's your thought on the best effective format for that? I know, and then we can tag that over to the outreach team to start tagging stuff into being able to move stuff forward.
Yeah, I think, for me, I think it's kind of unfortunate that nobody submitted applications yet, right? Because for me, if I would gauge it by what's the big, if I were to force rank why I need an extension, then I would formulate, here's an example of what a successful extension or exemption looks like. Base it on that, the various types of scenarios, because not all fleets are the same, but when it comes to infrastructure, it's a punch list. Hey, all of this stuff has to happen in something. When you're going through that punch list is a block. It's blocking. It's a blocker from you getting this done. And so if I run into that type of, whatever that blocker is, what's the corresponding data that I need to submit back to CARB to say, I need an extension or I need an exemption here, right?
Yeah, no, I agree that checklists are always good to help us, get through the process and to make sure that we were providing everything that's needed. So no, that's a great point, Will.
Yeah, I'll encourage those of you to look at the fact sheet we have online, because it lists by bullet item what you actually need to submit under the question on how do I apply for an extension due to the delay from the utility. And it specifically calls out, for example, the discussion we had earlier, what's the utility response that the project will take longer than a year, and an executed utility contract. And then it further specifies, however, if the utility is not willing or able to enter into that contract, then here's your next step. So it has some of those details, and like we can work with our, obviously these are some of the kinds of things that we will be covering in future trainings as well. And, we're internally, and frankly, we wouldn't mind some feedback. This is a list, but, if there's ways to provide checklists to minimize incomplete applications and things like it, those are things we're also looking to incorporate as we move forward.
And then there's also,
I think I want to, could I just reiterate what he said, because it is so important that we understand what CARB needs from an endpoint, but the punch list to get to those documents is 15 pages long, right? And so getting the checklist, and that's, what do you need to do in order to be able to get a response from the utility? I think that there's certainly the folks on this call who have been fortunate enough to outsource that, or have OEM or infrastructure partners handling that for them, or companies like mine doing that punch list. But we have checklists upon checklists upon checklists behind the scenes to get there. And I think for so many fleets in this state, they don't have those resources and they don't know where to start. It's not, how do you even get to that, right? And what happens if you hit a wall here? What's your next option? If you hit a wall here, what's your next option? I think William said punch list. Bradley mentioned a flow chart, for maybe visual learners separately, but I think that I just want to underscore, it sounds like those resources are needed from CARB in a big way.
Yeah, I do. I'm going to tread on the line between our group and the outreach group, but I do want to let everyone know that CARB has entered into a contract and offers free consultation services that are one-on-one. A fleet can apply for. It's called Cal Fleet Advisor. I dropped the link in the chat if you want to look into that. And if someone applies for that, they get assigned an actual person that's going to walk them through the ACF process, on how to apply for the exemptions, the extensions, how to report, how to do all that. And it's fleet specific for your fleet. So they are providing you an advisor on how to do that. So I dropped that link into the chat. But I think it's time to move on to the next topic. Otherwise, because we're already cutting ourselves short with the ZEV purchase exemption. And but
Jerry,
I did want to, yes.
Jerry, sorry, real fast, I
Mhm.
want to cut in there. So that, just to be clear, the Cal Fleet Advisor service is to help fleets transition to zero emission vehicles, not to walk through the ACF regulation and reporting and things like that. So they're actually helping fleets, find and secure vehicles, install infrastructure, incorporate how to incorporate zero emission vehicles into their operations. So very similar to what GNA and other consultation services do, but it is a free service through a CalStart partnership.
So I did want to ask, thank you, Chris. That was Chris from our team as well. By the way, you probably have all worked with Chris in the past. Bradley and Rebecca, do we want to do the poll now before we get started on the next one, just so that we make sure that we get that done?
Yep, let's roll the poll and get that started. So it is going to be coming up onto the screen from everybody. It's going to include all attendees as well. So not just the panelist group here. So we're going to get a temperature of the room of what's the level of frequency here, so we can go ahead and get that rolling.
All right. So here's the poll. Everyone should be seeing it on their screen now.
And we'll give it a few minutes for everybody to get their responses in. Not sure how many attendees do we have on the call? Can we find that out?
Looks like
we have 89 attendees on this call.
All right, and when they let us know when the votes, I mean, we can continue on. We don't have to wait for the poll. We can continue on, and we can provide the poll results in an email after the fact. But let's start talking about the ZEV fleet exemption. I'm sorry, I'm getting tongue tied here. But I will be turning it over to Jimmy Steele from my team to go over it. Let me just share my screen so that we can we'll present some slides like Chelsea did, and then we'll have some open discussion. So take it away, Jimmy.
Thank you, Jerry. So I will now provide everyone information on the ZEV purchase exemption. In the next 4 slides, I'll walk you through the requirements per the regulation, and then we'll have an open discussion. So please hold comments until then. The ZEV purchase exemption addresses situations where a fleet owner cannot comply with the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation due to circumstances beyond their control if a required ZEV is not available to purchase in the same configuration as a vehicle needing to be replaced prior to the next compliance deadline. Until 2035, a near zero emission vehicle, or NZEV, with a minimum all-electric range is treated the same as a ZEV. This exemption allows a fleet owner to remain in compliance by purchasing a new internal combustion engine vehicle of the same configuration instead of the ZEV or NZEV. If the California fleet is able to remain in compliance by using the flexibility in the regulation, there is no need to apply for an exemption. Similarly, exemption requests will not be evaluated for fleets that are already out of compliance. The 2 methods to claim the exemption are the fleet-specific application process and the streamlined ZEV purchase exemption lists, which I'll be describing on the next 2 slides. Moving on to the fleet-specific exemption application process, this would address situations where a ZEV is available in the needed body type configuration, but is unable to perform the vehicle's primary intended function. Exemption applications are reserved for fleet owners whose fleet's needs are not met by a ZEV or NZEV that is currently available to purchase. For state and local government fleets, following the ZEV purchase schedule, the fleet owner can request the ZEV purchase exemption for a given compliance year at any time when replacing a vehicle in the California fleet for a vehicle model year that is at least 13 years old. For high priority fleets, complying with the model year schedule, the fleet owner must be replacing a vehicle that is at least 16 years old or has at least 700,000 miles, whichever occurs first. High priority fleets must request an exemption no later than 1 year before the date in which an ICE vehicle must be removed from the fleet. For fleets following the ZEV milestones option, the fleet owner must demonstrate that the upcoming milestone cannot be reached without an exemption for any other ICE vehicles in the fleet. Fleet owners must submit the request no later than 1 year prior to the compliance date. For the fleet-specific exemption application, there are several layers of evaluation needed by the fleet owner here. For example, does a fleet owner need a crew cab, all-wheel drive, or a cab over? The fleet owner will need to identify if there are any functional limitations with the essential chassis frame attachments, such as outriggers, plow, rail wheels, car lift, or other attachment that is needed to perform the vehicle's primary intended function. Are there any vehicle configuration conflicts with existing health and safety laws, such as OSHA or NHTSA requirements? Written statements from at least 2 manufacturers that offer the vehicle or chassis as a ZEV or NZEV in the needed configuration, showing they do not offer the vehicle for purchase as a ZEV or NZEV to meet the same primary intended function of the vehicle being replaced. If no manufacturer makes ZEVs or NZEVs with the same general configuration, the statements can come from any other medium and heavy duty vehicle manufacturer. The fleet owners would need to submit an exemption request identifying the vehicle configuration and the conflict they identify. CARB will evaluate the ZEV purchase exemption package for completeness and whether the configuration is available for purchase as a ZEV or NZEV from any manufacturer, authorized dealer, or upfitter, and review complete requests within 45 days. If approved, the fleet may then purchase the identified ICE vehicle and keep appropriate records. The ZEV purchase exemption list streamlines the process for fleet owners because they can purchase a new ICE vehicle of the same configuration and weight class of any vehicle that is on the ZEV purchase exemption list without needing to go through an application process if they are otherwise qualified. The ZEV purchase exemption list will specify vehicle configurations that are not available to purchase as a ZEV or NZEV and the date the exemption expires for the listed configurations. The list will not include common vehicle configurations such as pickups, buses, box trucks, vans, or any tractors. CARB will gather information from manufacturers, authorized dealers, fleets, and other sources and publish an initial ZEV purchase exemption list no later than January 1st, 2025. After the list is posted, CARB will continue working with manufacturers, authorized dealers, fleets, and other sources and update the list to add or delete vehicle configurations as needed. The list will also rely on the ZEV purchase exemption applications to identify if configurations are unavailable to purchase as a ZEV or NZEV. The list will evaluate whether a ZEV is available for the following general configurations: bucket truck, boom truck, dump truck, flatbed truck, stake bed truck, front loader refuse compactor truck, side loader refuse compactor truck, rear loader refuse compactor truck, refuse roll-off truck, service body truck, street sweeper, tank truck, tow truck, water truck, car carrier truck, concrete mixer truck, concrete pump truck, crane, drill rig, and vacuum truck, just to name a few. The ZEV purchase exemption list will be posted and maintained on the CARB Advanced Clean Fleets webpage. Now for available resources, we have a ZEV purchase exemption fact sheet posted on our webpage and a training module will be posted soon. Now I will open the floor for discussion.
All the hands came up quick. Jerry, did you catch the first one? I think it was it Will. Is it going by top right? Call it for me, Jerry, if you're watching.
Unfortunately, I was sharing my screen, so I didn't count it.
Okay.
So yeah.
John, you're up, bud.
Hey, thanks. So 2 questions. One, I noticed that Jimmy mentioned 13 years for state and local government fleets. There was a bill passed, AB 1594. I just wanted to see if that had filtered into this process at all, because it relates to model years for state and local governments. So that's the first question. Second question is, when is the earliest somebody can apply for an exemption? I know the latest is with 1 year, but I've had several folks come to me and say, I need to buy multiple dozens of vehicles every year for the next 3 or 4 years just to comply with 2027, because they're a very large fleet. So the answer I got back from CARB Zev Fleets was, you can't apply for an exemption several years in advance because you're prejudicing whether something will be available 2 years later. So that sort of leaves the question open, what's the earliest I can ask for an exemption without having to wait all the way to the very end to buy all of my vehicles, whether they're ICE or ZEVs? So those are the two questions I have.
Well, for the first question, I think 1594 requires a rule amendment, so it won't change the rule until the process is complete. With regards to the ZEV purchase schedule, it's 13 years. If the fleet is following the ZEV purchase schedule, yeah, it's 13 years before they can apply for the ZEV purchase exemption. With regards to your second question, which was how early you can apply, yeah, it's no later than 1 year before the next compliance deadline, and no earlier than 2 years.
Is that in the rule? I'm sorry. Is that in the rule?
That's not in the rule, but we need to be able to identify whether or not that ZEV would be available. And there's no way of knowing.
Hold on. The fact sheet covers this topic.
Yeah.
It really depends on the compliance option. It is the second question, when I can apply. So encourage people to look at that.
Okay.
Yeah, and as far as 1594, also, I just want to add that 1594 doesn't apply to all of state and local governments, only to electrical utilities, water utilities, and wastewater utilities. So it's not a blanket coverage for 1594.
I agree. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, thank you.
Right, I'll start popcorn call here. Let's hear from David Clifford.
Yeah, thanks for taking my question. I guess we need clarification on how you're defining, I guess, truck configuration versus truck application. And I'll just go into a little detail about the bulk tanker industry. A lot of the trucks, I think a lot of the focus for the exemption has been on more homogeneous fleets, but in the bulk tanker, each trailer truck application there's a variety, and a lot of the ancillary equipment required to load and unload tankers, whether it's liquid or dry, simply don't exist right now. So I guess my first question is, does the configuration exemption include ancillary equipment that needs to be attached that may potentially be aftermarket?
To clarify, David, is that something that is a frame attachment or things like that?
It could be a frame. It could be a PTO. It could be in transit. What they could consider in transit heat pumps, pneumatic blowers, things like that to move product and to keep it. Some of them are temperature sensitive, so there's some concern there.
That is an element of the submission request, right? So of specifically what is equipped on the vehicle that makes it unique, right? And so that's part of the submission requirement of body type and what do you have? Do you have outriggers? Do you have a crane? Do you have PTO drive? All of those things are part of the exemption request.
And again, that's covered in the fact sheet too that Tony was mentioning as well. So we do recommend that.
Hold on, it is covered in the fact sheet, but to me, the way the question was phrased is, it would be really helpful to have a little more information, because I wasn't clear if it was equipment that's off the vehicle, compatibility issues or something else. So in the rule, it's the body part type of the vehicle, is what's its primary use or primary intended function. And then specifically, it is key equipment that might be literally attached to the frame of the vehicle in addition to the body. And we are trying to make and intended to make a separation between, hey, wait a second, I got the service truck and I'm putting a crane on the service truck or bolting something down to a flatbed. That doesn't change it from being a flatbed and doesn't change it from being a service truck. We're trying to make those distinction of those outriggers that are required for a crane to keep it safe and from tipping over. If you can't put those on the ZEV because of any reason, and therefore you can't use it as a crane, I mean, clearly that would be a basis for an extension. So I am interested in learning a little more about that. I'm not looking to answer the question at the moment, but it's things like that again, was one of my hopes from this group would be like, all right, here's things frankly we should know about. So we use the example of the rail wheels because we had discussions about that. And it's like, yeah, we know those are attached to the frame. That's kind of a no-brainer. And you can't use the truck on the rails if you can't put the rail wheels on it, right? I mean, so that's kind of really easy. And I'm sure like some of the other discussion we had earlier, we have to stay within our boundaries in terms of what was written in the rule. And so if it's like, wait, this isn't attached to the frame, but it's this, that, whatever, it's auxiliary equipment, well, we don't really have the ability to go that far outside or to go outside the box like that. So we need to, but at the same time, within the box, I guess, the better information we have, frankly, the better we can convey it to and inform people.
Yeah, perhaps on that, some conversation on the side would be helpful. Yeah. Share some of those details. My next question has to do with truck weights. Are you going to consider weights part of configuration to where if electric trucks, as we know, are a lot heavier than normal trucks, and if a load becomes infeasible, is that considered a configuration concern?
Short answer is going to be no. Because weight is going to be dependent on how you spec the truck in many ways. The most straightforward thing is, hey, is there a conflict with putting the body literally on the chassis in the weight and either the weight class configuration or the next weight class up, depending on the type of trucks you're talking about?
I think I was referring to the gross weights and being legal on the roads, the 80,000 pounds. Certain loads, especially import loads in the chemical industry, they're heavy and non-divisible. Some of them are hazardous in nature, and virtually 100% of those loads would be out of compliance from a weight standpoint. So I know one of the exemptions included safety protocols, so I was just curious to make sure if weights were part of that as well.
Weight by itself is not, and there is a 2,000 pound weight exemption on the combined vehicle weight. So 82,000 pounds is legal in California for a alternative fuel vehicle, zero emission included. So that partly addresses that. And at that point, then it depends on how you spec the truck, and just anybody wants to challenge this statement. But broadly, when we looked at trucks in all sizes, that if you have 100-mile range, which isn't a lot, I'll give you that. Weights really aren't different. When you want 300-mile range, yeah, clearly they're going to be heavier now. 5 years down the road, that might not be true anymore. But there is that weight exemption as well. And so, but yeah, we explicitly did not include that as a separate item. So it by itself is not an item that we can consider. And so there's going to be some decisions that
weight by itself. But also in that context, and I think David's area of concern for that specific vehicle type would be safety overall, right? So if there's a level of safety that it is not able to be built to that specification for a DOT requirement and things like that, then that's a different item, not specific weight, but still something to consider. If the vehicle can be built in a safe manner at the weight that it needs to be, then
yeah. And to make sure we're talking the same language, I mean, if you can't buy it just because the manufacturers don't want to make it, it's not that they can't, they just don't want to, and they're not selling it, and nobody sells it, then that's a basis. So if it's, hey, I'm not going to build this truck because it's not going to satisfy my customers, I'm not going to spend my effort there, or I'm not doing it for safety or some other reason, I'm not going to offer it, then that's essentially sufficient to say, okay, you can't buy it. Some of those things will be maybe indirectly addressed, and that they're not actually going to be for sale if there's a problem associated with it.
Okay, so eventually, I guess what you're saying is if the truck manufacturers aren't producing trucks of a low enough weight for safety purposes, if there's a legitimate, and we can legitimately prove that that's an actual safety concern, then that would we would be able to apply for an exemption in those cases.
Yeah. And yes, broadly, and then to me, there's going to be some, for us, I think some benefit in understanding, okay, what is an equivalent? And this is where we're going to rely on industry to agree. I'm hoping that this group can shed some light so that we can, like we're saying, is with the ZEV exemption, if it's not an easy answer for us, it's like, all right, we'll put it out there and see what dealers or manufacturers say they have a solution. Here's what the rule says. Here's the information. Here are dealers, you can all see it if you're offering it. And again, by rule, it's tell us the make and model of the body that you have on the existing truck you're looking to replace. The manufacturers, yeah, I can do the same thing. I have a different make and model, but it can functionally do the same thing this model does. Then that would be a basis to say there's something out there, no exemption, kind of thing. And so to me, determining that equivalency will be relying on manufacturers and others is part of that to a degree, and any other experts that we can, touch bases with. And again, the quicker we can understand whether there's a fit or not a fit, then sure, if we can get you a response in a week, great. We have 45 days to get you that response, but if we can get it faster, we will.
Okay, one last question, then I'll allow others to speak. It has to do with the fueling industry. Has CARB considered whether or not refineries will actually allow electric trucks into their loading racks? Will they make exemptions for that industry?
So we've been approached with that as an idea, and so what we're asking for is, give us something like an OSHA requirement or something else that specifies that there's some kind of direct conflict, because we're fully aware of battery electric fuelers loading airplanes and jetways on a regular basis in multiple places, so no obvious conflict there. But again, we'll look at the but in the rule, it's written that it's whatever the can't even speak about it right. Whatever the standard is, existing standard that's out there. It's like, yeah, bring it to our attention, and then we'll be able to evaluate it.
Yeah, this is Chris. Just to jump in real quick, and we did include that safety provision because we were approached by somebody in the fueling industry indicating that they needed to have their trucks UL certified to enter fueling racks. So pointing at something like that and saying, hey, we need to have the truck UL certified. Here's the safety standard that shows that we need to have it UL certified. Nobody's making a ZEV that is UL certified. That would be something along the lines of what we're looking for.
Yeah, and I guess I'll add and we, a year ago, we spoke to some of the refiners who have trucks at their own facilities, and they didn't bring this up as an issue. So that's all I can tell you at this point.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to Nick Blair.
Yeah, few questions. One, I wanted to return, and maybe I didn't hear it correctly, forgive me. As far as AB 1594 goes, it sounds like, did I hear correctly, you're gonna reopen to amend the rule at some point? It's just for clarity, and if so, in the interim, is there any consideration of the spirit of AB 1594, just in how exemption requests might be processed? And then my second entirely separate question is that once a fleet starts purchasing and field testing, do you view this as an appropriate venue to report if there are limitations or failures that we can use to inform future decisions as far as determining if a vehicle is available and meets the fleet's needs?
Speak first. I'll jump in. Okay. So yeah, as far as the 1594 changes, we have to amend the rule. I mean, that's bottom line. So that does require a rule change to make it take effect. And so we're trying to figure out the timeline to do that. And it, and it is a segment of the fleets that would even be affected. The other, sorry, I forgot the other part. The other part of the question was, don't remind me, please, or somebody else take the answer. Getting a little older.
Yeah. I'll just restate. I just was saying, like, so I hear you that rule needs to be amended. In the interim, in the spirit of what 1594 is seeking, is that going to result in any consideration, or are you halting until you formally amend the rule on that?
At this point, holding till we amend the rule. And again, it'll depend on what applications come in to see if it even has a direct implication. Because again, we have to put it down and the board got to prove that it does in fact align in terms of the details. In terms of the other part of your question, one of the things in the regulation, this pertains more to whether the vehicle's usage matches the fleet's needs. In that provision, we have some default values to use, but specifically in there, we identified as, hey, if you have a like-for-like example of a diesel, for example, versus a battery electric in the same use and application, you can use that information instead of the default mileage and other characteristics as evidence that the need for the fleet doesn't align with what the vehicle is capable of doing. And so I do believe that there is some opportunity there. And in the regulation, we specifically also said and purposely wrote in, it's like, yeah, if you are a fleet of operating effectively the same kinds of vehicles in the same way, you don't have to do your own separate test if somebody else has already got evidence to that effect. So we can rely on other fleets' experience or data sources collected from a third-party source as a basis for using that in evaluating the extensions. And so it would be, I think, a appropriate forum potentially to have some discussions on that, or separate subgroup or something like that to focus on any details that might come from that.
Okay, it looks like there was a question in the chat from Suzanne, but you've also got your hand raised. Did you want to introduce that one real quick, Suzanne?
Sure. So I posted a question, or actually just a problem, that there isn't a definition of available to purchase and or commercially available. And because you don't have that definition, I think it makes it difficult for fleets to know if they're going to qualify for this exemption or not in advance. So I wanted to know if it could be considered that a list of criteria be created for fleets and for CARB staff to utilize to help determine whether a particular ZEV satisfies the operational criteria and the specs of the vehicle it's intended to replace. And just some of that criteria I was thinking it could include would be like just the vehicle cost doesn't exceed like 1.5 times that of a new vehicle. The vehicle fulfills the duty cycle and work needs of the vehicle it's intended to replace without requiring the purchase of additional vehicles. And there's other criteria I could also list, and then there's probably even more. So that's the proposed solution I was hoping we could discuss.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Suzanne. That's a good point. I did post in the chat that the regulation does provide some criteria for ZEV and NZEV, to determine whether it's available to purchase. So there is actually a list of criteria that needs to be, met in order to determine whether the ZEV or NZEV is available to purchase. If we want to discuss that more, that's perfectly fine. I don't know if we clearly don't have the time to go into it too in depth today, but we could definitely add it to the list of things that we're going to be looking into as we go forward here. So
that would be great. That's why I posted it in the chat, because I figure you're going to print this out at some point and review. So thank you, Jerry. And I appreciate the response as well.
No problem.
Hey, Susan, just for a clarification on your remarks, I think in the way that in the spirit of the ruling, right, is the language, on the website. The intent, as I perceive it, or an exemption may exist if the ZEV or near ZEV is not currently produced, right? So nobody makes that type vehicle. But as a suggestion to CARB, and I think I may have misinterpreted what Susan said in her opening remark, but I think it should also include language that says, hey, this is into the site that says that, hey, this has nothing to do with production capacity of ZEV near ZEV, right? Because there may be ambiguity because, hey, just because it's being built doesn't mean it's going to be available to me. So maybe I should file a exemption because is by year 2035 production, with the OEMs, they may be at full capacity and those vehicles may be unavailable. I don't see that that language that exempts production capacity in the lack of capacity in the website.
That's how I've read it as well. I mean, there's nothing that allows us to avoid purchasing from a low volume manufacturer, and there's a lot of challenges that come in with that. So, I mean, we could even start with just addressing like just timely mechanical service for that vehicle throughout the state. I mean, that's a challenge, but I don't have a full solution to that. So
Well, actually, the exemption does, I mean, what I dropped in the chat does say that it's 18 months or less from the date the fleet owner submitted the complete exemption request. So it is covered in there, what you were referring to, Will. But it doesn't specify OEM production capacity, but the 18 months does cover it.
it's just with a low volume manufacturer, they might be able to deliver you a vehicle in that time frame that you've shared, but they probably will have a more challenging time supporting it for the life of the vehicle. And then that's a huge challenge. So I don't have a solution to that, but I think understanding some of the other, I mean, we talked about the spirit of the regulation. I don't think the regulation intends that, we replace like, a diesel or natural gas truck with 3 to 6 or however many hydrogen or electric vehicles it takes to, perform the same duty cycle, but this isn't really spelled out. So I just thought a definition might kind of make that more clear for folks just going into this, so they don't apply for an exemption, have it rejected, or they just know years in advance, where they're going with some of these trucks.
Again, I'll encourage you to look at the information we did put together. There is the 18-month provision that if you can't buy the vehicle within the 18 months of your application in the model year within 18 months, then you're not required to do it. Your quality assurance concerns are covered by the ZEP certification requirement. That somebody in their garage can't meet that requirement is going to be, it's a quality assurance measure, and helps provide standardized information as to what the vehicle capabilities actually are. So both of those would address that issue. And the usage issue is a different one. So sorry, so it's like, I think you mixed a couple of things in there. It's like, hey, if I can't buy the vehicle from a small volume guy because it's not available for 5 years, that's one thing.
That wasn't what I had mentioned.
Okay.
You can't, let's say you can, and I think several fleets are going to be pushed into buying vehicles from small manufacturers, small, low volume manufacturers. But the challenge is, supporting the vehicle after you've purchased it and after it's been delivered to you. And like I said, I don't have a solution for that, but understanding like other exemptions in, just the spirit of the regulation. What I had mentioned about, replacing a diesel or natural gas vehicle with multiple EVs or hydrogen vehicles. What is that number? Is it 1 to 3? What's acceptable?
Brett, you had a opinion to provide.
Come from a place of selfishness as a major OEM. I think we have places we can borrow proudly from for this solution, Suzanne. I don't think they're the greatest solution. The HVIP vehicle eligibility criteria does spell out service and support network, though I've seen a lot of low volume Franken-truck manufacturers, as I like to call them, that slice and dice OEM chassis and put their powertrains in them, that I think draw a lot of concern from an industry from my industry perspective, where I'm very familiar with our service support network and also our robust product validation piece. And the last thing I think you put into the chat that wasn't addressed, Suzanne, is the price point of it. If there's one option out there that is ripe for market manipulation from a pricing perspective and putting customers at risk. And I don't say that from an OEM perspective, wanting to maintain, and we want to design products that meet our customers' needs. And we have a really good read on who our customers are as the 40% market share manufacturer in the space. But I want CARB to be very, very mindful of really what qualifies that manufacturer in this space. And I understand what you're saying, Tony, about the ZEP certification. But just when I look at that HVIP list and I look at the HVIP vouchers and redemptions, I think even there you see a great disparity in who was able to achieve obtaining vouchers as an OEM and who has been actually market relevant at delivering those products. And that puts our customers and the fleets and the movement of freight in California at significant risk, speaking nothing about their ability to service and support those vehicles through the ZEP powertrain certification time periods allotted. Sorry, that was a diet. I apologize.
Thank you, Brett.
Passionate about this one. Thank you, Suzanne.
So Bradley and Rebecca, we are at 3:46 now, and we still have several hands up, and it's kind of turning into a Q&A session here, which really doesn't fit the spirit of what we're looking for here. We want to have an open discussion. So we do probably want to start just taking comments from the hands that are raised. We want to get to them, but I'm going to open the chat to the general attendees too, so we can get a temperature of what they're wanting to discuss as well. Yes, Tony.
I mean, we're supposed to be done at 4, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And we're not going to recap or anything. I mean,
yeah, we're gonna have to.
So we're because I don't know if we can even get through the comments at this point or that.
All right, so let's. So what?
I mean,
would you?
Rebecca and Hadley, it's like, what do you guys want to do? I mean,
I think there's a lot. It's the first meeting, and we're learning a lot from everybody who's sharing. So maybe the debrief can take place afterwards, and I think knowing a little bit more about the poll would be helpful. But before we get there, I know there's some people who haven't been able to speak at all and have had their hand up for a while. Sarah, I think in particular, you haven't spoken yet today, so.
All right, thank you. More maybe comment, question, couple items, just raising the 1594 that's mentioned in terms of timing of rule amendment, but I know that that's uncertain at this point, but it is pretty time sensitive given it's for, vehicles that respond to major events. And we have a lot of those in the water community and such. So thinking about that a little bit more, but also there's one item, at least from a state and local government fleets regulations perspective, that has been a bit unclear for folks, and among other things. But we did understand that on the ACF regulation terms of the model year schedule that begins in 2024, but we understood that the state and local government fleets have no requirement to end the use of their existing compliant vehicles, and that we wanted to just confirm. Otherwise, staff have recently had said, though, that the state and local government fleets have to consider whether their vehicles are 13 years or older in general. And that's something that has now changed the way folks are trying to, or at least it's provided some uncertainty in their evaluation and trying to understand whether they're going to stay with state and local government fleets or enter into high priority fleets. So some clarification around that, or just being very explicit about no, there is no requirement to end the use of their existing compliant vehicles would be great in guidance document, but it underscores the need for a guidance document and being explicit. So those 2 items. I have a number of others, but I also want to recognize that there's others that had their hands up too. And we can also follow up in any kind of emails, maybe with some more specifics on what we would like to see in the guidance documents going forward.
I'll briefly just say, we'll definitely take interest in some of the issues you want to make sure are covered. I know we're planning a training module and other things to go specifically for state and local government options and things like that. And so we can incorporate those directly in that and other things as well, and we'll coordinate with our outreach team on that.
Okay, and the timing of that would be pretty important just because of the requirements to state when you want to opt into, one versus the other are coming up in just a few months here. So that would be more useful earlier than later.
Speaking of timing, sorry, Tony.
I'll just say for clarity, it's like if people do want to choose the milestone option, they can do it almost at any time up until 2030. So it's not, you don't have to necessarily make the call right away. But just want to make sure people understand that too.
Yeah.
Speaking to timing, if we can share the poll results, so everybody here on the call that's still staying with us can see the results from at least the temperature of frequency. We're definitely astounding of a monthly call. 2 hours is the average, it appears, and that gives us a good temperature to work through in regards to the next meeting. So we'll take this in from our perspective here for being able to pull the call together. If there is a want or a need for panelists of not being able to attend in that frequency, please communicate that as well. I know this was identified as a quarterly, but obviously there's still lots to be addressed and lots to be discussed. And Rebecca and I definitely want to make sure that these meetings become a regular and productive fixture in being able to move some things forward.
I think with that in mind, knowing we want to figure out how to make this as effective as possible, and potentially these monthly 2-hour meetings might be a better cadence. The next question I have is what time can folks commit for preparation prior to the meeting? So, are there resources that we could share? Are there questions, can we have an agreement that things would be submitted a week prior to the meeting to make it as effective as possible, knowing that we all have many questions and many issues. If one of the 3 of the big focuses are the infrastructure and the 2 infrastructure and the purchase exemption, how do we make that as effective as possible? Because I think, as Brett said, there's, if you've met one utility, you've met one utility. As all of us know, if you've met one fleet, you've met one fleet. We all have so many individual issues to address, but what can we bring? What can we do to make this more effective next time in terms of focusing in on getting specific recommendations, specific things that the outreach committee can take? How do we do that? What can we bring and prepare?
And does a survey bode us well, right? In between, for panelists in between, a grouping of questions to help the group prioritize the agenda for the next item, and then materials to work on in between. So yeah, I will say thank you everybody for all the time, because this is a very, very important discussion for us to have, and I really appreciate the patience of those people that did have their hands raised, and we may not have been able to get specifically to your question specifically, but knowing that with a frequency increase possible here, we're going to be able to share those questions and concerns you may have, and start talking those out and hashing those out. So topics for future meetings, as you can see on there, as for next steps, if you have ideas for specific items within that were already discussed, I mean, we'll be bringing that back for feedback from what's already discussed here today. And then I think Rebecca and I would really like to see a goals for each meeting, right? A discussion item specific. We target that. We all know that this one specific thing is going to be advantageous for us to accomplish in a 2-hour stint in a meeting. Those are the things that we really want to be able to move forward with. Is there any general comments or questions, concerns before we're getting closer to the 4 o'clock? I want to be very mindful of time and allow additional general feedback, whether that's Carb, Tony, anybody from staff as well.
It looks like we have a hand up. It looks like Sarah put her hand up.
I said it before you mentioned getting feedback from Carb, so if you want to prioritize that, that's fine. But generally, I just wanted to support working ahead of these meetings to be pretty intentional about the agenda and what we're trying to, in terms of our objectives, and trying to make sure that we're coming prepared with a very specific, maybe clarifications and other questions that we can really work through, like I said, in an intentional way. That'd be great.
And on just from the CARB side, I do want to thank everyone for participating. We do want to ensure everyone that we do want to have open discussion, and we want to work, collaboratively to help implement this regulation, because like Tony mentioned, there's a lot of bumps and different obstacles that we need to overcome, but we need to understand those as well. So thank you everyone for participating. We are working diligently to make sure that we get all the fact sheets, the video modules, the trainings, everything out there for everyone. And it would be good, from what we heard, we might have some sort of a joint trig meeting with one of the other, because it looked like some of these subjects align, are real close to align with infrastructure or with outreach. So we can definitely talk about maybe possibly having a joint meeting. But we do want to thank you, and we do want to let you know that we hear the concerns, we hear the questions, and we do our best to respond to all those. Just a reminder that next Friday there will be a training webinar on high priority fleets, so that would be helpful for everyone. Spread the word. You can find all the meeting information posted on our ACF meetings and events webpage. But I don't want to take up all the time, so I want, if anyone has any final comments or questions
Nick's got his hand raised.
All right.
Yeah, on a lighter, well, thank you very much for holding this. On a lighter note, I was going to say, hopefully, for the good of this subcommittee, we did the Friday afternoon session. So hopefully next time, one of the others gets volunteered for the last one before the weekend.
Yes, what a way to spend our Friday afternoon, right? But I guess what that makes that means we're all good and ready for the weekend, though.
And I do want to reiterate too, we're going to be debriefing all of the comments and all of the webinar chats and all of the things, and collecting all of these things. So and sharing that back with the panel as well. If there's something that wasn't specifically spoken about here, we want to make sure that we're capturing those comments and those items, and whether or not they become part of the conversation for the next go around, or if we're relating that back to an FAQ sheet or something that's already existing. All right, Rebecca, any final thoughts?
No, just a deep appreciation for spending 3 hours of your afternoon, helping us all work through this and get to some better answers. So thank you.
Those 3 hours flew by. Let me tell you that. I was watching that really was a quick 3 hours. So thanks everyone. And again, we will stay in touch, but thank you, and everyone have a good weekend, and be safe out there.
Thank you. You too. Thanks.